American Comics. My Warhammer Simulator Chapter 901-925. Chapter 901. Insane Precognition in Hansu the Warpsmith. Luo Sha slowly opened his eyes. Titus and Tiberos, standing beneath the metal throne, immediately awoke as well. Luo Sha did not blame anyone for the death of his simulation. After quickly reading all the marked content on the simulator page, he immediately chose the Primarch Organ Reinforcement reward. Luo Sha wanted to see if the special power he gained this time could completely restore his massive body, which could currently only move slightly. HMPH. The next moment, Luo Sha couldn't help but frown. A sharp, intense pain suddenly bloomed deep within his brain, forcing him to let out a muffled groan. Tens of seconds later, all discomfort quickly disappeared. Luo Sha blinked his eyes back and forth, seemingly finding nothing different. However, when he focused his gaze on Titus and Tiberos, who were waiting for the Primarch's instruction beneath the metal throne, a series of psychic precognitive images, completely beyond Luo Sha's control, continuously appeared in his field of vision. Luo Sha vaguely saw a much taller and more robust Captain Titus charging amidst countless broken Astartes corpses. Numerous snarling orcs, surprisingly, followed behind him. Together with Titus, they launched continuous ranged attacks towards a mechanical giant ahead, whose size was comparable to an Emperor-class Titan, yet its overall structural design was entirely different. On a more distant, brutal battlefield, Wild Wolf Luo Sha, wielding a blood-red great axe, was teaming up with Sai Fu Luo Sha, who held a white tiger greatsword, engaging in an incredibly fierce battle with another burly figure, with Astartes from various warbands lying dead around the three of them. At this moment, the psychic precognitive image belonging to Captain Titus suddenly shifted. A group of Ultramarines, personally led by Titus, were moving back and forth beneath the terrifying forms of numerous mobile hive cities. Mutants, each releasing different superpowers, launched continuous energy bombardments at Titus and his companions. If it were only this, the fleeting psychic precognitive images would not have surprised Luo Sha much. However, Titus's state in the precognitive image was clearly abnormal. He looked more like a demon prince who had pledged allegiance to chaos. At this moment, Luo Sha's gaze couldn't help but shift. The psychic precognitive image from Tiberos quickly appeared as well. Under the heavy encirclement of countless tyrannid gun worms, the surrounding ground was littered with a large number of broken shark-eater Astartes corpses. Tiberos, noticeably larger and with his vibranium Terminator armor shell already shattered, seemed to be in some kind of desperate situation. He instinctively clutched his two lightning power claws, their blades broken. He launched a final battle charge towards a dozen never-before-seen new types of tyrannid. Immediately after, the psychic precognitive image changed once more. Tiberos, with an incredibly grave expression, was facing a dual assault from Wild Wolf Luo Sha and Sai Fu Luo Sha. There seemed to be an irreconcilable conflict between the two sides, which could only end with the tragic death of one party. The next second, Tiberos, who had transformed into a demon prince, led the Chaos Carcharodons, whose bodies had undergone massive mutations, into a hive city. He began to unleash a horrific slaughter ritual upon the countless civilians around him. At this moment, countless future scenes, both good and bad, continuously filled Luo Sha's entire mind. It also caused him to completely lose his basic judgment of truth and falsehood. Finally, Luo Sha, closing his eyes tightly, forcibly used his will to switch off the invisible toggle of his psychic precognition, temporarily ending the seemingly endless psychic precognition. Now I finally understand why Kosh became so insane. If I had to face this situation every moment, I would go crazy sooner or later. I can forcibly shut down my psychic precognition, but Kosh has no control over it, he can only passively endure this pain. At this moment, Luo Sha, slowly opening his eyes, thought to himself. Subsequently, he shifted his gaze and inquired Tiberos and Titus about their training experiences. As Luo Sha had predicted, they were indeed sent to an Imperial fleet specifically tracking the whereabouts of Midnight Wanderer. It was even their subsequent boarding tactics that led to the accidental tragedy of Luo Sha's simulated body's demise. However, Luo Sha merely gave Titus and Tiberos a few simple instructions before having them temporarily leave the private palace. Just as Luo Sha never believed the future scenes brought by psychic precognition. The more one shows concern for certain matters, the greater the chance they will occur, until everything becomes an unchangeable, predetermined outcome. Rumble. Beams of incredibly brilliant giant light lances continuously blasted out from the weapon arrays of the massive metal ship. After carving trails of visual afterimages in the cold void, they heavily impacted layer after layer of fully extended void shields. Currently, Luo Sha's Calamity Legion fleet had just been ambushed by dozens of Iron Warriors warbands along a void route in the Ultima Segmentum. These traitors, who had unfortunately lost their Gene Father, had finally tracked down the whereabouts of the Calamity Legion. Countless Chaos Astartes, led by Chaos Sorcerers and Warpsmiths, eagerly launched a frantic operation to seize Perturabo from the massive fleet. And Luo Sha's numerous Astartes sons quickly demonstrated their combat styles. They either launched riskier boarding actions against the Chaos Fleet, such as the Shark Eater Great Company and the Silver Skull Great Company. Or they set up ambush traps within the massive ships, waiting for more boarding Chaos Astartes to come to their deaths, such as the Blood Raven Company and the Ultramarines Company. As for the Black Templars Company and the Space Wolves Great Company, they remained on standby to prevent other problems from arising during the entire engagement. As time continuously passed, one after another, frigates or small ships belonging to both fleets detonated and sank. Dense numbers of ancient landing craft and boarding torpedoes crisscrossed between the fleets, braving the immense risk of countless laser arrays and light lance bombardments, launching boarding actions. Once Luo Sha's flagship was also successfully infiltrated by a large number of boarding teams personally led by Hansu the Warpsmith. Luo Sha, who had slowly conjured a combat shadow clone, immediately led 5 giant Raven Guards to launch a decapitation strike against Hansu the Warpsmith. As long as Hansu, the spiritual leader of the Iron Warriors, died. Even if the entire fleet would still face pursuit and interception by the Iron Warriors Legion in the future. The Chaos Warband, greatly lacking cohesion, would ultimately be nothing more than a disorganized rabble. Thank you all for your support. Rumble. In the depths of the massive ship's mid-level compartments, a series of incredibly violent explosions erupted, with intense, scorching flames sweeping along the wide corridors. If Titus and his Ultramarines company hadn't evacuated the vast majority of the mortal crew beforehand, then the Iron Warriors' boarding tactics would have resulted in even more casualties among the mortal crew. Thump, thump, thump. A veteran Ultramarine clad in blue Terminator armor charged towards the Iron Warriors inside the ship's passageway. A storm of bolter rounds rained down upon them, only to be firmly deflected by a shimmering blue force field. At the same time, the Ultramarine veteran abruptly swung one of his thick arms. The silver tendrils, recently implanted within him, instantly transformed into strands of slender silver wire. These incredibly destructive silver threads sliced through the air at high speed, utterly cutting several Iron Warriors, who were holding up heavy boarding shields, into countless bloody fragments. In fact, even though the destructive power of the silver tendrils far exceeded expectations, their implementation within the Death Guard was not going smoothly. Only apothecaries and techmarines within each company regarded them as treasures, along with a few battle brothers willing to try new things who chose to have the silver tendrils implanted. As for the other Astartes, their feedback was that the control process was too cumbersome and that they had a natural distrust of Xeno's equipment. Rumble. In just a short time, as many as 2 combat squads of Iron Warriors had fallen to the Ultramarine veteran's silver tendrils. However, just as this Ultramarine veteran was about to call for support and continue deeper into the ship's passageway, an iron-gray figure, far taller and more massive than ordinary Iron Warriors, suddenly appeared within the range of his visor. Primarch. The coordinates have been sent. I've found their leader. Reacting quickly, the ultramarine veteran used the comm channel to transmit his location before the enemy could launch a fierce attack. The next second, he resolutely activated his Terminator armor and charged towards the iron-gray giant. Ultramarines. I hate ultramarines the most. At that moment, Hansu, the warsmith, whose mechanical eye flickered with red light, couldn't help but mutter under his breath. He abruptly raised a thick arm, its bulging skin completely exposed, the whole thing resembling living metal, and launched a fierce attack on the ultramarine veteran. After only a few rounds of intense combat, the ultramarine veteran, who had no problem dealing with ordinary iron warriors, was easily knocked to the ground by warsmith Hansu. Damn traitor, your choice to execute boarding tactics is a mistake. You will never find your Gene father. And our Primarch is on this flagship. He will find you himself and avenge us. At this moment, the ultramarine veteran, looking up at warsmith Hansu through his shattered visor, let out a muffled roar. But warsmith Hansu, his face expressionless, paid no attention to this. His massive magnetic boot came down heavily, crushing the ultramarine veteran's entire head. Hey, who told you I wanted to rescue Perturabo? I'm just using that as a reason to unite countless Chaos warbands. As for the Gene Father, countless ages have proven that the Iron Warriors Legion is the same with or without him. Warsmith Hansu coldly gazed at the lifeless ultramarine veteran and muttered to himself. He abruptly activated his extremely ancient Terminator armor and walked deeper into the ship's passageway. Rumble, rumble. Just then, with a deafening roar as large sections of heavy armor plating suddenly shattered. A pair of incredibly huge xenohands forcibly pierced through the surrounding metal floors and walls, firmly seizing warsmith Hansu's thick limbs. The next moment, 5 giant Raven Guard, their bodies far larger than warsmith Hansu, revealed their massive forms. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. Immediately afterwards, wisps of dark shadows rapidly materialized in the air, coalescing into a shadow clone based on the Reality Stone as its core. I can actually sense Rogel Dorn's bloodline aura from you. Aren't you a son of Perturabo? Or are you an accidentally produced hybrid? Rogad, his massive body standing in place, was momentarily stunned. He stared at warsmith Hansu, whose thick limbs were firmly restrained by the 5 giant Raven Guard and held aloft, and asked. Haha, am I a hybrid? The whispers in the warp always circulate rumors that the 22nd Primarch is the hybrid. In my opinion, you are the hybrid of hybrids, the king of hybrids. At this moment, warsmith Hansu, completely cornered, showed no fear or regret. After desperately trying several times to break free, only to find it impossible, he instead began to curse loudly in Rogad's direction. However, Rogad, whose expression was gradually turning grim, did not let the other party rage for long. He then nodded slightly to the 5 silent giant Raven Guard. Crack! Instantly, the giant Raven Guard, exerting force between each of their massive hands, forcibly tore warsmith Hansu's massive body into a bloody, limbless torso. Only a heavy torso lacking limbs remained, crashing heavily onto the metal floor. Subsequently, Rogad, listening to the cries and curses constantly pouring out of the other party, stepped forward. He abruptly raised a giant shadow foot and forcefully crushed the other party's head. Notify all Astartes, warsmith Hansu is dead. Kill all the Chaos Iron Warriors who boarded, leave no one alive. Rogad, in his shadow clone state, gave the order to the giant Raven Guard without looking back. As time rapidly passed, large numbers of Chaos Iron Warriors were divided and surrounded within the massive ship by the Space Wolves and the Ultramarines Company, and quickly annihilated. Within the Chaos Fleet, which was repeatedly suffering the boarding tactics of the Silver Skulls and the Carcharodons, significant disagreements also arose. Ultimately, under the command of other Chaos Sorcerers and Warsmiths, these dozens of Iron Warriors warbands, who had come to ambush the Death Guard fleet, paid an incredibly heavy price in casualties before embarking on a warp route away from the Ultramar sector. However, Rogad did not order the Death Guard fleet to pursue the Chaos fleet. After comprehensively considering the losses from this ambush war and the damage to the ships, He had Tiberius and the others find the closest Imperial world to temporarily repair the massive fleet that had just finished fighting. Thank you for your support. When an incredibly vast, unfamiliar fleet slowly approached the Imperial world of Perea, the first thought of countless mortals on the near-orbit defense platform was that Perea was utterly doomed. After all, most of Perea's defensive power was on the ground. The defensive forces remaining in space consisted only of a few scattered troop transports. There wasn't even a single basic combat vessel. However, once communication codes belonging to the human empire, as well as communication messages from some psychic personnel, came through the communication channel, countless mortals, whose hearts had been in their throats, immediately embraced each other and wept. Even though every mortal had been prepared to perish with Perea from beginning to end, just as their legendary commissar said, it's always better to live a bad life than to die a good one. Buzz buzz buzz. Several Thunderhawk transports with roaring vector engines detached from the flagship's deck and flew towards Perea's surface. Inside the dimly lit cabin, a luxurious party consisting of captains from various companies, plus Luo Sha, who was being lifted by several automatic servo robots, was awaiting the landing of the flying vehicle. This wasn't because Luo Sha and his group had much respect for the Imperial world of Perea. The main reason was that Luo Sha had been sitting on the metal throne for too long. He planned to touch the real planet ground to adjust his mindset. Otherwise, Luo Sha always subconsciously believed that he might have to stay on that metal throne for countless years, just like the Emperor. Boom! With a subtle vibration transmitted into the dimly lit cabin, the Thunderhawk transport finally landed on a flight platform on Perea. After several company captains, who clearly weren't ordinary at first glance, stepped out of the cabin one after another, Luo Sha, who was slowly carried out by several automatic servo robots, subconsciously took a deep breath of fresh air. Tiberius, please remind me that after our fleet sails for a period of time, unless we are facing an urgent war, we must find a suitable planet for rest and recuperation. So many people staying in a confined fleet for a long time will turn even a good person into a bad one. Luo Sha, who had taken several deep breaths, spoke calmly to Tiberius. However, before Tiberius, who was standing by, could reply to Luo Sha, a team of mortal officers, consisting of Astra Militarum commanding ranks, quickly stepped forward to welcome the arrival of the Primarch my lord. We welcome the arrival of Dark Side Regent my lord, and we also welcome more Emperor angels to inspect our defense work, the crowd, bowing in salute towards the Primarch, shouted in unison. Luo Sha, squinting, nodded slightly towards the mortal officers in front of him. Originally, he wanted to quickly deal with these tedious audience ceremonies and then wander around alone to relax. However, at this moment, he suddenly saw two mortals in his vision who were most familiar from his memories. Commissar Kephas Kane and Adjutant Yugen, how are you two here? Luo Sha asked subconsciously. And as the Primarch my lord's low voice echoed around, almost everyone present instantly shifted their gaze to Commissar Kane and his Adjutant Yugen, who were hiding behind many mortal officers. Ah, I never thought Dark Side Regent my lord would notice a humble commissar like me. Esteemed Primarch my lord, this is my true hometown. I have been semi-retired for many years, and now I am staying on Perea to live out my retirement. Commissar Kane, whose appearance and hair already showed signs of age, had to speak at this moment, enduring the silent gazes of countless people. He answered Luo Sha calmly and respectfully. So that's how it is. Everyone else, you are dismissed for now. If anything happens, contact Captain Tiberius. Commissar Kane, you and Yugen stay. Luo Sha, nodding slightly, commanded again. And Commissar Kane, whose expression was slightly awkward, could only offer a professional smile to his colleagues with countless strange looks. However, his two hands, trembling slightly behind his back, seemed to indicate that Commissar Kane was far from as composed as he appeared. Soon after, inside the most luxurious palace in Perea City, Luo Sha, completely surrounded by more automatic servo robots, was undergoing one body examination after another. Commissar Kane, are you perhaps curious why I am in this current state? At this moment, Luo Sha, whose eyes were still tightly closed, suddenly asked the restless Commissar Kane nearby. Hee, Primarch my lord, such confidential matters needn't be revealed to us mortal officers, need they? We simply cannot bear the responsibility, Commissar Kane, forcing a professional fake smile onto his face, quickly said. Furthermore, why did you specifically ask me and Yugen to stay? Is there some secret mission you need to entrust to us? Rest assured, I will do my utmost to complete the mission for Primarch my lord. As Commissar Kane's cautious words fell, mechanical tentacles moving back and forth adjusted Luo Sha's massive body into an upright, seated posture. Luo Sha's gaze fixed on Commissar Kane and the still carefree Yugen nearby, and he slowly spoke, Commissar Kane, you probably already forgot, but we actually fought side by side once, facing endless orcs together. Primarch my lord, please forgive my forgetfulness, I don't recall ever fighting alongside you. Some of my old friends have personally experienced those fierce wars where you descended, but I assure you, in the name of the Golden Throne, this is my first time meeting you. At this moment, Cephas Kane, his brows slightly furrowed, racked his brain but couldn't recall anything. He had experienced countless battles, big and small, in his life, and faced even more crises than hairs on an ox. Instead, Yugen, who was repeatedly examining Luo Sha's appearance from the side, seemed to vaguely remember something. Just as he was about to speak, he glanced at Commissar Kane, and then he closed his mouth, acting as if he knew nothing. That was a long time ago, so it's understandable that you don't remember. However, since we can meet here, it means the Emperor has favored you once again. Luo Sha, smiling slightly, didn't mind Commissar Kane and Yugen's reactions. One of his massive hands moved slightly. Several crystal-clear panacea, enveloped in wisps of black shadow, slowly floated before Commissar Kane and Yugen. This is panacea produced only by my legion. Besides being able to cure countless diseases, it also has a great effect. It can greatly extend the lifespan of carbon-based life forms. Cephas Kane, the grim situation of the human empire now requires you to come out of retirement. You will probably only live for a few hundred more years. At this moment, Dark Side Regent Luo Sha's low voice made Commissar Kane and Adjutant Yugen subconsciously open their mouths wide. Even their faces showed an expression of extreme shock. Thank you for your support. Cephas Kane, The Last Stand, Part 1. Compared to a lifespan of several centuries, Cephas Kane would actually prefer to live peacefully until the day his soul returned to the throne. However, he could not defy the request made by a distinguished Primarch and my Lord Darkside Regent. Even if it wasn't a superior subordinate command, but rather a playful jest between comrades or friends. But Cephas Kane also deeply understood one principle. That is, never act recklessly just because of a little appreciation from those in higher positions. Caution is the way for a mortal to survive. Boss, what are you hesitating for? This is good stuff. Just then, his muttering adjutant Yugen snatched several panacea before Commissar Kane could react. He swallowed one panacea without any hesitation. Then, a miracle of rejuvenation quietly occurred under Commissar Kane's silent gaze. On Yugen's bald, shiny head, which was covered in graying hair, countless fresh, jet-black hairs reoccupied the high ground. And as the wrinkles covering his face gradually vanished, his originally slightly stooped, tall body also became full again. However, the only problem was, the strong stench emanating from Yugen seemed to have become even more concentrated. Many of the dark shadow that Luo Sha had not quickly retracted instantly dissipated into the air as if evaporated. Adjutant Yugen's innate untouchable talent seemed to have been greatly enhanced. Seeing Yugen safely complete his rejuvenation, returning to his familiar youthful appearance, Commissar Kane took a deep breath, reached out, took a panacea, and quickly put it in his mouth. The next second, a young Commissar Kane, with sharp features on a firm face and exuding the charm of a mature man, appeared in Luo Sha's field of vision. Afterward, Commissar Kane, who had cautiously conversed with the Primarch for a few moments, intended to take his leave. However, after only a few steps, he mustered the courage to ask Luo Sha if he could have a few more panacea. He still had several well-connected female confidants who needed to serve the human empire with all their might until death. Luo Sha, slightly taken aback, didn't pay much mind. He casually grabbed 10 more panacea and tossed them to Commissar Kane. Thus, a meeting between old friends temporarily concluded. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Thunderhawk transport, carrying a large number of Astartes tech sergeant, slowly landed on the planet Perea. Many Adeptus Mechanicus personnel, with their mechanical arms rotating back and forth, came forward to greet them. They intended to assist the tech sergeant in repairing many mechanical constructs or heavy fire weapons that could not be repaired during void voyages. And in the city streets and large squares not far from everyone. Many mortal crew members and servants, who had almost never left the inside of the vast ships in their lives, saw real land and sky for the first time. They chewed on local Perea food while occasionally raising their hands to cheer the name of my Lord Primarch. Although Luo Sha sometimes considered the sacrifices and efforts of countless mortals to be a matter of course. But at least he would give them a unique hope and aspiration. This was probably one of the reasons why there were rarely signs of chaos corruption within the vast fleet of the Calamity Legion. Hiss, hiss, hiss. At this moment, Luo Sha, whose massive body was held suspended in midair by dozens of mechanical tentacles, felt the sunlight from above while allowing countless dark shadow power to circulate and surge throughout his body. Now his entire upper body could move freely. And the terrifying power that could burst forth from his now normal, thick arms also made Luo Sha believe that he was certainly much stronger than before. Thump, thump, thump. Just then, a faint sound of footsteps slowly came from behind. Luo Sha immediately controlled a large number of automatic servo robot to lower his entire massive body back to the ground, facing the newcomer. Commissar Kane, do you need something from me? Don't tell me a dozen panacea weren't enough for your number of lovers. Luo Sha asked indifferently. And Commissar Kane, whose entire being was filled with vibrant spirit and demeanor, could only give an awkward smile, and he said, My Lord Primarch, I have a serious matter to discuss with you this time. Before your fleet came here for rest, an incident occurred on a small mineral asteroid not far from Perea. A large number of miners who were extracting minerals disappeared without a trace, and according to the information we have been able to collect so far, there might be some hidden Tyrannid remaining there. We originally intended to have a group of Astra Militarum new recruit who were undergoing combat training handle this matter, but since I just discovered that you have such an astonishing number of Astartes battle group under your command, I would like to borrow a squad of Astartes from you to reduce some unnecessary casualties. As soon as Commissar Kane finished speaking, Luo Sha, instinctively narrowing his eyes, said, Why are these Tyrannid everywhere? Commissar Kane, your request is granted. Go find Captain Tiberius, he will arrange a squad of Astartes veterans skilled in pest control for you. Thank you for your consideration, my Lord Primarch. At this moment, Commissar Kane, having received permission, immediately bowed towards Luo Sha. Then, with a slight smile, he quickly turned and walked out of the palace platform. And Luo Sha did not have any particular thoughts about this. Besides Kephas Kane indeed being favored by the Emperor, he also appreciated the other party's shameless pragmatism. After all, not trying to utilize the many Astartes around, but instead letting countless mortal warriors pay the price of sacrifice, is what a normal imperial officer would do. But Kephas Kane was different. He would try every means to minimize his subordinates' losses while also fully ensuring his own safety. If unfortunately faced with true despair, even the death-fearing Commissar Kane would erupt with a tenacious fighting will that surpassed mortals and even Astartes. Soon after, Commissar Kane's asteroid cleanup operation was successfully completed. Due to the inclusion of a squad of Carcharodon's veterans, the Astra Militarum new recruit who went along became mere spectators to a slaughter show. They also witnessed the Astartes combat style for the first time. However, just as Luo Sha and the others were systematically carrying out full-scale rest and acquiring more fleet supplies from the local area, A sudden unexpected situation temporarily interrupted everyone's plans. And it plunged the imperial world Perea, which had just enjoyed a period of stability, into a great crisis once again. Thank you all for your support. Kephas Kane. The Last Stand 2. Rumble. With the violent shaking of countless buildings and the continuous rumbling vibrations from the ground. Deep in a valley about several hundred kilometers from the main city of Perea. An incredibly massive pillar of psyker light suddenly shot into the sky, its immense force directly scattering countless clouds, even penetrating deep into the cold void. At this moment, such an astonishing change naturally attracted everyone's attention. In the city of Perea, every Astartes participating in daily training quickly drove their power armor into the streets. They completed the reorganization of various companies according to their familiar combat squads, waiting for combat orders from my Lord Primarch or the captains. And even the mortal warriors, who initially felt a hint of panic, immediately entered combat readiness. They either quickly evacuated the mortal civilians on the city streets or gathered towards their garrisons, carrying lasguns. Kephas Kane. What is that? Why do I sense such a massive psyker fluctuation? What in the world is hidden on your Perea? Just then, Luo Shah, who was originally chatting with several legion captains and Commissar Kane, suddenly turned his head. His cold gaze seemed to penetrate layers of buildings, personally witnessing that incredibly massive pillar of psyker light. Titus. Tiberos. Gabriel. You are to gather all Astartes remaining on the planet's surface, immediately take control of Perea's entire command structure, and bring over anyone related to that psyker light pillar. At the same time, order the Legion fleet to quickly reorient its weapon arrays, aiming at Perea's surface. Until we investigate everything thoroughly, no one here can be trusted. If anyone resists, kill them without mercy. The expressionless Luo Shah said in a deep voice to the captain standing by, without hesitation. Upon receiving the order, Titus and others immediately drove their power armor out of the building, leaving only a few mortal officers looking at each other in dismay. My Lord Primarch, I assure you, by all the combat honors I have earned in the past, Perea has absolutely no entanglement with Chaos or Xenos. Our only loyalty is to the Emperor and the Imperium. At present, I am certain that the problem is an alien artifact research project belonging to the Adeptus Mechanicus. Although I don't know exactly what they are researching, I believe you don't need to make such a big fuss, do you? The thoughtful Commissar Kane cautiously stepped forward. He spoke to Luo Shah, who was supported on the ground by mechanical tentacles. Kephas Kane, do you think I'm mobilizing so much combat power just to guard against you mortals? At this moment, Luo Shah, his cold gaze slightly shifting, stared at Commissar Kane standing not far away. An alien artifact capable of releasing such a massive psyker fluctuation will inevitably attract repeated prying from Chaos, and even other Xenos races might be completely drawn in by the continuous psyker fluctuations. Whatever the damned Adeptus Mechanicus is researching, they have lit an incredibly conspicuous lighthouse on Perea. And who knows what horrors the light of that lighthouse will attract from the cold void. Luo Shah's low words slowly echoed in everyone's ears. Even Commissar Kane, his lips quivering, had to take a few steps back, standing quietly to the side. In any case, this disaster was accidentally caused by the Adeptus Mechanicus on Perea. And to completely quell this impending great catastrophe, countless mortal civilians and Astra Militarum on Perea could only rely on my Lord Darkside Regent. Thump thump thump. Soon after, with a series of extremely heavy footsteps, the massive Captain Tiberos re-entered the palace. His thick arm was wrapped around a Forge Master clad in a red robe, and in his other large hand, he dragged several tech priests with shattered metal bodies. My Lord Primarch, this group of Adeptus Mechanicus personnel should be somewhat involved in the appearance of the Psyker Light Pillar, because when we just arrived there, they were trying to escape. However, these tech priests seemed to have a guilty conscience and attacked us first, so we only left one alive. As soon as Tiberos finished speaking, he slightly moved his thick arm, and the Forge Master, who had been clamped in his arm, was instantly thrown onto the floor. My Lord Primarch, I surrender, don't kill me. I swear to you in the name of the god of machines, this was completely an accident. We didn't know how that alien creation was activated, we really didn't do it on purpose. A clear female voice, mixed with mechanical sounds, quickly reached everyone's ears. And Luo Sha, with his incredibly keen perception, clearly noticed Commissar Kane subconsciously clenching his fist. Tell me your name, and what alien creation your Adeptus Mechanicus is researching. How should we deal with those things next? Luo Sha slowly took a deep breath and asked the female Forge Master lying on the floor in a deep voice. My Lord Primarch, I am Felicia Teber, a Forge Master affiliated with the Peria Adeptus Mechanicus. Many years ago, we accidentally excavated a considerably large alien creation from deep underground. According to our detailed investigation, this is a powerful artifact left by an unknown Xenos race, and its creation time even far predates the origin of humanity. We also speculate that the antiquity of this unknown race is comparable to the space Necrons, because while searching for various materials, we unexpectedly found fragments of information in some ancient legends of the Eldar. This alien creation was later collectively referred to by us as Shadow Light, because it is not a single entity but is composed of several components. The most important of which is a palm-sized stone with a smooth, jet black surface, which is also the most important core component of the entire alien creation. We currently have no idea about the function of this alien creation, only speculating that it might have the ability to alter the very structure of the universe, but the specific driving method is unknown. However, through our long-term research, we have also discovered that shadow light has an extremely dangerous side effect. Upon contact, it can awaken the psyker power of latent psykers and enhance the power level of active psykers. However, not all psykers can survive after touching shadow light. The vast majority of psykers will perish on the spot, even with protective measures. Therefore, a tech priest who was killed by your Astartes once proposed a theory that shadow light was designed as a combination device of an antenna and a battery, used to absorb a large amount of warp energy, and then drive a main system whose function is unknown. Thank you all for your support. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And support the author by link in description. Kephas Kane, The Last Stand, Part 3. Throughout the entire Milky Way galaxy, there are not many unknown Xenos races that can rival the space Necrons in terms of existence time and are older than the Eldar. Among them, the most skilled in using psychic power is probably only the legendary Old Ones. Even if the Xenos creation, Shadow Light, on Peria did not come from the Old Ones. The numerous advantages and disadvantages of this Xenos artifact alone were enough for Luo Sha to spend some thought on it. The advantage, naturally, was the possibility of gradually researching the correct activation method in the future. Even if the Xenos artifact only had the special ability to alter the structure of the real universe, it would be enough for the human empire to do many things. At that time, Luo Sha could even charge the four gods by blocking the Eye of Terror. But in contrast, the disadvantages were also quite obvious. That is, a mere imperial world like Peria simply could not protect a Xenos artifact of this magnitude. If Luo Sha completely ignored it, then 9 times out of 10, chaos would turn it into one of their terrifying creations. If it really came to that point, perhaps the emergence of a second Eye of Terror would only be a matter of time. In any case, Luo Sha, as a Primarch and Dark Side Regent, must actively take on more responsibility to transfer the Xenos artifact, Shadow Light, away from Peria. Kephas Kane, I order you to take your Forge Master lover. Yes, your outward display just now was too obvious. You are to find a way to shut down the Xenos artifact. I will mobilize the untouchable within the Calamity Legion to assist you in this operation. My only demand is to try your best to preserve the integrity of the Xenos artifact. If the situation is too critical, then only keep the core components, and destroy some harmless parts to stop the rampant psychic power fluctuations. If your operation succeeds, then all past transgressions will be wiped clean, and you will receive countless honors and praises. If your operation fails, then you will embark on the path of void roaming with me, and die in loyalty." Luo Sha's low voice quickly echoed in everyone's ears. Commissar Kane, his expression grave, immediately stepped forward. He performed an Astra Militarum salute towards the Primarch my lord. Afterwards, Commissar Kane immediately led his aide Yugen and the bewildered Forge Master Teber running out of the building palace. Luo Sha also immediately notified the fleet. He ordered Deadpool and his companions to descend to the planet Peria's surface and join Commissar Kane's adventure. As time continued to pass, the psychic power emanating from the Xenos artifact, Shadow Light, grew stronger. Although these were all incredibly pure psychic powers, not chaos psychic power from the warp. However, this situation was also extremely dangerous, and the restless chaos would certainly not let go of such a wonderful thing. Yet, at this moment, the first Xenos force to arrive before the Typhoon fleet was not the Chaos Legion, but the Space Necrons. Boom boom boom. An asteroid, which was supposed to be a mineral production site, gradually deviated from its predetermined orbit and began to tumble madly towards Peria. Just as many massive ships quickly mobilized their weapon arrays, preparing to launch several volleys to melt the entire asteroid away. Continuous green light bloomed on the surface of the asteroid, and that rapidly tumbling asteroid actually split apart on its own. Large amounts of asteroid fragments either crashed directly into the Legion fleet's ships, or narrowly dodged the fierce bombardment of the low-orbit defense platforms, falling heavily towards the surface. Almost simultaneously, Space Necrons, each gripping a Gauss weapon, immediately launched a fierce carnage around the landing points. More tomb technicians also began to set up tomb creations for rebirth or teleportation. Dong dong dong. However, whether it was the Astartes remaining within the fleet or the Astartes stationed on the planet Peria's surface, they had already made all preparations for the arrival of the Xenos forces. The first wave of attack from the Space Necrons had not yet fully unfolded. Large numbers of Astartes veterans, their vibranium energy shields raised and melta weapons in hand, preemptively launched a raid to destroy the tomb creations. In fact, if the Space Necrons were stripped of their endless rebirth characteristic, unless they had an absolute advantage in numbers, their individual quality was far inferior to that of the Astartes. More importantly, before Trazyn the Infinite went missing, he even explained in detail to each company how to fight the Space Necrons in order to increase his bargaining chips for returning to his homeworld. Rumble rumble. Terrifying Gauss weapons drew streaks of green light in the cold air. And the Astartes, who were launching raids, gradually set up heavy firepower weapons. Countless heavy bolter rounds and melta beams flew back and forth across every fierce battlefield. Space Necrons fell repeatedly, only to be reborn again. It was only after a group of fearless Astartes veterans forcibly beheaded the tomb technicians and destroyed the tomb creations, that eliminating the remaining Necron warriors became only a matter of time. However, just as the Astartes and Space Necrons were engaged in fierce combat, with a warp gate suddenly appearing in the cold void, a medium-sized Chaos fleet quickly revealed its conspicuous presence. They immediately maneuvered their massive ships, with void shields raised, to approach Peria's low orbit, and then dropped Fear Claws, enveloped in heavy fire, towards the surface. Boom! After dozens of Fear Claws crashed to the ground, large numbers of Chaos Astartes from Abaddon's Black Legion roared out from inside the landing craft. The objective of these Chaos traitors, whose bodies had already mutated, was very clear. They neither launched a carnage ritual against the large civilian population nor engaged in excessive entangled combat with the rapidly converging Astartes. These Chaos Astartes of the Black Legion, instead, directly sprinted madly towards the Xenos artifact, Shadow Light, whose psychic light pillar had not yet dissipated. At this moment, Luo Sha, who was observing and directing the overall battlefield from a distance, waved a hand towards the giant Raven Guard standing by, ordering these Super Astartes to go and eliminate the Black Legion traitors. And to be even more cautious, Luo Sha also immediately mobilized Gabriel, the company captain of the Blood Raven Company, who was currently besieging a large number of space Necrons, to lead a portion of his Blood Raven boys to support Kefas Kane. If the overall battlefield situation still underwent an unexpected change, then Luo Sha, who was calmly waiting, would certainly make his move and become the stabilizing force to secure victory. Thank you all for your support. Kefas Kane never liked bolt pistols. Those things were usually propaganda tools the Departamento Munitorum used to fool new recruits. He was more proficient with a laspistol that had accompanied him through countless firefights. If he needed a melee weapon, his chainsword was his second lover. It wasn't Kane boasting, his swordsmanship was genuinely good, at least top tier among mortals. Rumble rumble rumble. A chainsword with a furiously roaring motor was wielded forcefully by Commissar Kane. The chainsword suddenly slashed through the air, then embedded itself deeply into the hard chest of a metal skeleton. Countless frantically rotating sharp teeth continuously sprayed out a large amount of sparks. The next second, before Commissar Kane could forcefully pull back the chainsword, a Mechanicus cog axe, accompanied by an incredibly terrifying, ear-piercing shriek, crashed down, sending several Necron warriors, who were surrounding Commissar Kane, flying. I say, Tiberius, how far are we from your escape testing grounds? There are more and more of those skeleton frames chasing us. Commissar Kane, with incredibly nimble footsteps, quickly ducked to avoid streams of green light. He turned his head back and forth, glanced at the mortal warriors who had suffered heavy casualties, and yelled loudly at Fabricator General Tiberius, who was mowing down enemies. Fabricator General Tiberius did not answer immediately upon hearing Commissar Kane's call. From under his tattered red robes, a metal tail suddenly rose. The tip of the tail suddenly bloomed with dazzling beams of melta rays, continuously piercing and melting dozens of Necrons. This is the entrance area of the artifact laboratory. There is still some distance to the actual testing grounds. Rest assured, these skeleton frames won't be able to get in so easily. Fortunately, we didn't activate the self-destruct device when we evacuated the area, or we'd be in big trouble now. The crisp voice of Fabricator General Tiberius reached Commissar Kane's ears. It also eased his somewhat anxious mood. Hey, that crazy untouchable cog above, we need you to stay alive and intact, not be turned into ubiquitous atoms by the Necrons, Gauss weapons. The excited roar of Fabricator General Tiberius made Commissar Kane subconsciously poke half his head out from behind a piece of cover. He immediately saw the untouchable named Deadpool, leading his mechanical constructs in a frontal charge against a group of Necrons displaying terrifying figures. Judging from their reckless behavior, the chances of total annihilation far outweighed the chances of success. Jurgen, set up your Helgen and give our friend a chance to survive. That's all we can do. At this moment, Kefas Kane, a hint of helplessness appearing between his handsome eyebrows, had to wave his hand towards his aide, Jurgen, who was hiding to the side. Jurgen, unable to resist a grin, immediately raised the heavy Helgen and unleashed an incredibly intense barrage of fire on the densely packed Necrons. Boom! Just as Commissar Kane also subconsciously poked out his laspistol and randomly pulled the trigger. A tall figure covered in black sister of battle armor heavily landed near Commissar Kane and the others, accompanied by a cloud of dust. The Astra Militarum soldiers, who had been suppressed by the Necrons, offensive and unable to raise their heads, were initially startled, then quickly reacted. Kefas Kane, I am Canoness Major Jessica of the Disaster Legion. Remember, your mission is to shut down the Xenos artifact and ensure its integrity. You don't need to worry about the survival of Deadpool's Legion. He has been blessed by the Emperor with an immortal body and can't die even if he's hit by a barrage of Gauss weapons. Canoness Major Jessica, with eyes that were more profound and mature, and an expression that was incomparably stern, said in a deep voice in the direction of Commissar Kane. As soon as she finished speaking, under the gaze of Commissar Kane and the large number of Astra Militarum soldiers, Jessica, gripping a master-crafted power scythe in her palm, suddenly stomped the ground and took off. She unhesitatingly crashed into the area with the most Necrons, and each time she swung her giant scythe, dozens of Necrons were reduced to metal wreckage. As the only introductory disciple of Primarch Rocha, even though Rocha rarely paid attention to her specific movements, Jessica was now a battle-hardened sister of battle. In terms of one-on-one combat power alone, basically every Space Marine Company captain might not be able to withstand her for long. Only a few Space Marine Company captains, such as Tiberius, Gabriel, and Ragnar Blackmane, could steadily overwhelm Jessica. If Jessica had not always been uninterested in how to lead a large army, Rocha would have long ago let her lead a battle sister squad on her own. Brothers, did everyone hear that? Our mission remains unchanged. Tiberius, continue to lead us deeper into the testing grounds. Jurgen, you and a portion of the Astra Militarum will cover our movements. At this moment, Commissar Kane, seeing that the threat of the Necron offensive had been temporarily blocked by the crazed Deadpool Legion and the arriving Canoness Major Jessica. Without any hesitation, he seized the opportunity and immediately issued the order to continue forward to everyone around him. In an instant, the Astra Militarum soldiers, hiding behind cover, risked being killed on the spot and began to move quickly towards the testing grounds where the Xenos artifact was located. Rumble, rumble, rumble. However, at this moment, an extremely intense series of explosions suddenly came from the rear of the Necrons. Commissar Kane and the others, who had just advanced a short distance, thought that another Space Marine company had come to support them. But as the number of Necrons rapidly decreased, and the constantly rising smoke and flames gradually dissipated, Chaos Space Marines, covered in a thick bloody aura from head to toe, slowly emerged into everyone's field of vision. Black Legion. Perlia is really lively today. Why have countless demons and monsters all come? Commissar Kane, unable to resist taking a deep breath, raised his hand to hold down his commissar's hat, muttering to himself. Tiberius, I hope you can successfully help me shut down the Xenos artifact, otherwise, without the Primarch himself issuing a punishment order, it will be a blessing from the Emperor if this group of us can return alive. Golden Throne above, I hope the Emperor can occasionally pay attention to me. Thank you for your support. Boom, boom, boom. On the broken surface of Perea, which was gradually covered in blood and debris, 5 giant Raven Guard, wearing vibranium specialized power armor, were charging frantically, leaving a swirling trail of blurry dust behind them. Soon after, they, like human tanks at full throttle, cut through the center of the battlefield where the Silver Skull Great Company and a large number of space Necrons were engaged in a firefight. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Beams of disintegrating light from the space Necrons' Gauss weapons and terrifying cannon fire continuously streaked across the dimming sky, leaving clearly visible trails. The countless whirlwind missiles and heavy firepower of the Silver Skull Great Company roared incessantly, desperately suppressing the space Necrons' advance. Just then, Craig, the leader of the giant Raven Guard, seemed to notice that several Silver Skull's combat teams were temporarily surrounded due to their assault on a Tomb Technician construct. Without turning his head, he waved his massive hand at his giant brothers beside him, gesturing for them to maintain their original plan. Immediately after, Craig's magnetic boots stomped on the ground. As his heavy footsteps kicked up countless gravel and dust, his entire massive body suddenly employed Shadow Step, a stealth divine skill possessed only by Primarchs and Raven Guard, and launched a support operation towards the friendly unit that was about to be completely overwhelmed by a large number of Scorpion destroyers. Although every Astartes within the Calamity Legion fleet knew that the current giant Raven Guard were Super Astartes, far surpassing Primaris Astartes in combat power and all other aspects, and were the precious gene seed for the next generation of Astartes. However, people would occasionally feel a hint of jealousy towards these burly giants who had long followed my Lord Primarch, without disrupting unity, and even secretly uttered many unfriendly words. But the giant Raven Guard, who inherited the fighting will of 2 Primarchs from their gene seed, learned the combat styles of the Raven Guard and even other companies, and whose bones also contained the berserk genes of Gamma series monsters, always maintained a very rare clarity. That is, the giant Raven Guard are not special, not noble, and not super. They are, after all, just a group of Astartes loyal to the Primarch and the Emperor, and who can sacrifice themselves on the battlefield at any time. Boom! In an instant, his entire massive body suddenly flashed out from the shadows on the ground. Craig, the leader of the giant Raven Guard, simply threw a punch with all his might. Under the gaze of 3 tomb technicians, he completely destroyed a tomb technician rebirth construct standing over 10 meters tall. The next second, the bolter suddenly raised in his other massive hand successfully dealt with 3 tomb technicians who were planning to counterattack. The leader of the giant Raven Guard simply adjusted his combat stance, then launched an extremely fierce offensive against several Scorpion destroyers who were wielding super phase swords and slaughtering the Silver Skulls. Approximately tens of seconds later, Krieg, who hadn't even revealed his giant form, managed to hack the besieging Scorpion destroyers into omnipresent living metal debris on the ground, as if cutting melons and vegetables, simply by relying on a super phase sword he had snatched. Crack! The leader of the giant Raven Guard, whose massive body was almost completely unharmed, subconsciously rotated his helmet's eyepiece and gazed at the super phase sword gripped tightly in his massive palm. He then turned around and collected the Space Necron's melee weapons from the severed limbs of the Scorpion destroyers. While he was busy, over a dozen heavily wounded Silver Skulls stood up from the ground or behind cover, and heavily pounded their Dow steel chest plates towards the giant Raven Guard's broad back. Finally, the leader of the giant Raven Guard, who seemed to show no emotional fluctuations towards others, immediately activated his vibranium specialized power armor, carrying several intact super phase swords, and quickly ran deeper into the battlefield. This Black Legion fleet cannot withstand the firepower for too long. Continue to have all captains bombard the Chaos ships, Void Shields. Have the Astartes of the Shark Eater Great Company prepare for boarding. Once the Void Shields are overloaded, initiate boarding combat immediately. Luo Sha, with countless battlefield situations projected within his line of sight, rapidly turned his thoughts, diligently analyzing the developing situation on the battlefield. He issued numerous orders to different communication channels. Chief Librarian Vashiro, your Silver Skull's Astartes casualty data has exceeded expectations. I order you to maintain the defensive line. I will mobilize other companies to support you. Ragnar, lead the Space Wolves yourself to support the Silver Skulls. I need you to completely eliminate the Space Necrons on the surface so that I can focus all my attention on the Black Legion. Gabriel, have your Blood Raven boys accelerate their advance. Kephas Cain and their mortal forces have been engaged by the Chaos Astartes. High Sister Jessica and the Deadpool Corp's combat power won't last much longer. Reditus, mobilize several fully formed Smart Control Legions to completely sweep away the remaining Space Necrons in the Cold Void. At the same time, have the Hero Tower expand its detection range to prevent other alien forces from appearing around us. Now that the Space Necrons and Chaos have reached Perea, please don't attract the Tyrannid. At this moment, Luo Sha, with countless thoughts rapidly turning in his mind, completed a series of deployment orders. He suddenly took a deep breath through his nose, then temporarily closed his eyes, easing the flow of blood within his body. Even though Luo Sha had now vaguely found the knack and joy of being a battlefield commander, he still found it hard to imagine Regent Gilliman's command style, which allowed him to simultaneously remotely control multiple Indomitus fleets and a large number of ground forces to launch attacks. In a sense, Regent Gilliman's battlefield command ability had far surpassed that of carbon-based life forms, resembling more a precisely geared artificial intelligence. Of course, Luo Sha also knew that this was just a playful thought that subconsciously arose in him. Regent Gilliman's commanded campaigns did not always achieve victory. After all, his brother was not the Chaos Warmaster who was victorious in every battle. Just then, Luo Sha, whose thoughts vaguely recalled something, slowly opened his tightly closed eyes. His massive hand flipped slightly. A reality stone, faintly emitting a dark red glow from within, immediately appeared in the air. The next second, as wisps of dark shadow continuously emanated from Luo Sha's massive body, rapidly coiling around the reality stone. On the smooth floor of the building palace, a shadow clone that could be maintained for a long time once again appeared within Luo Sha's field of vision. Thank you all for your support. Bang, bang, bang. The lithe body of Sister Superior Jessica was sent flying backwards, crashing heavily onto the ruined ground. Her black sister of battle armor was covered in the brutal marks of countless cuts and blows. Even the master-crafted power scythe she had been gripping tightly in her hand had fallen far away onto a pile of corpses. Thump, thump, thump. A series of extremely heavy footsteps echoed all around. A massive figure, roughly 4 meters tall. A Chaos Astartes in ancient Terminator armor, adorned with various human remains and metal ramming spikes, slowly strode forward. At the same time, more Chaos Astartes wielding demon weapons surged past him, relentlessly pursuing Commissar Kane and the others who had ventured deeper into the laboratory. A mere battle sister dares to hold back the entire force. Do you look down on the Black Legion? Or do you doubt the combat prowess of us Chaos veterans? I admire your courage, but I despise your foolishness. At that moment, Garland, the commander of this Black Legion force, lowered his head to gaze upon Jessica, who was struggling to rise from the ruined ground. His face, already mutated to resemble a chaos demon, emitted a grating sound like metal scraping against metal. TCH, why do you chaos traitors talk so much? Is it because you're always hiding in the warp, with no one to talk to? Oh, I forgot, you perverts probably even sleep hugging chaos demons, fitting for chaos worshippers. Raising a hand, Jessica wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth with the back of her gauntlet, her bloodshot eyes narrowing. She was trying to emulate her mentor's trash talk and venomous tongue to buy some time for the panacea within her power armor to take greater effect. In fact, Jessica believed that if she could change the battlefield, with her immense strength and flight capabilities, she wouldn't necessarily be defeated by this Chaos Commander. Although her combat experience couldn't compare to these millennia-old Chaos veterans, if she used guerrilla tactics, she could stall until reinforcements arrived. However, Jessica also understood. Her risky decision to confront the Chaos Astartes head-on was to cover Commissar Kane and the others, allowing them to delve deeper into the laboratory and successfully shut down the Xenos artifact. Hey, a sharp-tongued mortal. After I personally twist off your head, I will hang your tongue on my armor. At that moment, Chaos Commander Garland, unable to restrain himself, let out a low, cold laugh and activated his Terminator armor, launching a terrifying charge. Countless fragments of stone and dust sprayed out from around his heavy feet. The demon weapon, a blood-red great axe gripped tightly in his massive hand, howled through the air as it crashed down towards Jessica's head. Boom! At this critical moment, Jessica, her injuries already recovering, slammed her mag boots against the ground repeatedly. She leapt high into the air. One mag boot abruptly tensed, using its flight capabilities and the terrifying power it unleashed to strike heavily at the exposed head of Chaos Commander Garland. However, for these Chaos veterans with their unparalleled combat experience, the weaknesses they exposed to their enemies were essentially pre-designed traps. Before Jessica's mag boot could fully land, Chaos Commander Garland casually retracted the demon weapon, the blood-red great axe, and abruptly raised his other massive hand, grabbing Jessica's slender leg, then violently swung the colorfully faced Jessica towards the ground. PFF'd. Instantly, a torrent of blood sprayed from Jessica's mouth. The violent impact from the ground caused major and minor fractures throughout her body. However, just as Jessica's life hung by a thread and she was about to have her head chopped off by Chaos Commander Garland. Boom, boom, boom. 5 even larger, terrifying figures suddenly flickered out from the nearby shadows. Super phase swords, their sharp edges glowing with green light, slashed heavily towards Chaos Commander Garland's entire body. These were the giant Raven Guard, who had just arrived at the designated battlefield. Caiaphas Cain felt his breathing becoming increasingly difficult. This was not because his physical strength was being overexerted. In fact, After Commissar Kane relied on the panacea bestowed by the Primarch to regain his youth and lifespan. He had never experienced anything more powerful than his peak physical condition. At least, his lover had been full of praise for it. Therefore, the difficulty in breathing felt more like an illusion caused by excessive mental stress than a real sensation. However, when the perceptive Commissar Kane noticed that everyone around him had the same symptoms, he realized that it might be a series of effects caused by excessively concentrated psychic fluctuations on the human body. Soon after, as the group traversed maze-like, long corridors, delving deeper into the secret areas of the laboratory, the cold, biting air completely woke up the exhausted group. Tiberius, how exactly are we going to shut down the Xenos artifact that is emitting large amounts of psychic energy? The Primarch has repeatedly instructed me to preserve the integrity of the Xenos artifact as much as possible. Commissar Kane, exhaling a white breath between his mouth and nose, quietly approached Fabricator General Tiberius. He deliberately lowered his voice and asked the question. Although we did not expect the Xenos artifact to suddenly go berserk, countless past experiences have allowed us to pre-design many large-scale control devices. As long as we can successfully separate the core components of the Shadowlight from the rest, then the raging psychic fluctuations will inevitably gradually dissipate. Fabricator General Tiberius slightly raised his head, which was covered by a red hood, revealing a pair of beautiful eyes hidden beneath the respirator. However, Kane, who was more familiar with every inch of the other party's body and mechanical components, subconsciously sighed. Tiberius, you're missing a, but, at the end, right? Ah, as expected, you understand me, Kane. When all of us evacuated the experimental site earlier, I was unable to successfully activate more of the psychic suppression devices. If the rampant psychic fluctuations cause greater destructive effects, then all the control devices will inevitably become a pile of scrap metal. Fabricator General Tiberius said in a heavy tone. Then what are we going to do? Don't tell me that the management of your Mechanicus has not prepared other plans. Of course there is a backup plan, but that plan will require countless lives to fill. Thank you all for your support. Kephas Kane, The Last Stand, 7. By the time Commissar Kane led his forces to the entrance of the Adeptus Mechanicus experimental hall, the psychic fluctuations within everyone's field of vision had reached a visible intensity. Numerous mechanical constructs scattered throughout the wide passage and the heavy metal doors used to seal the experimental hall showed varying degrees of distortion and deformation. It was fortunate that the alien artifact was not continuously emitting chaos psychic power. Otherwise, given the current situation, there would be no need for external intervention. A large chaos portal would spontaneously open, spewing forth countless chaos demons with bared fangs and claws. But even so, Commissar Kane and his group had to completely shut down the alien artifact before the Chaos Astartes behind them arrived. Otherwise, if a Chaos sorcerer skilled in warp sorcery from the enemy's ranks were to reach this place, Perea would surely face a large-scale Chaos invasion. At this moment, Kephas Kane, whose gaze was shifting back and forth, also noticed that the overly dense psychic energy in the surroundings posed a great threat to the existence of mortals. Many Astra Militarum soldiers following them had already begun to experience symptoms such as dizziness, nausea, vomiting, and even uncontrollable bleeding. Only a small portion of mortal warriors who might possess psychic potential, as well as the untouchable, showed no problems. Thus, Commissar Kane, who could barely hold on, immediately ordered the vast majority of the Astra Militarum to return to the depths of the passage. He instructed them to hold their ground and undertake the difficult task of preventing the Chaos Astartes from approaching this area, even at the cost of their lives. He himself, along with his aide Eugen, Forge Master Teber, the even more excited Deadpool Corps, and a dozen Astra Militarum soldiers, ventured deeper into the experimental hall where the alien artifact was stored. Click, click, click. With a deafening roar and increasingly dense psychic fluctuations surging wildly from within the twisted metal door, Commissar Kane and his group, as if facing a fierce wind, finally saw the extremely mysterious alien artifact with their own eyes for the first time. At this moment, the ceiling of the experimental hall, hundreds of meters thick, had almost disappeared. In its place was a massive pillar of psychic light soaring into the sky, and in the center of the experimental hall, a huge unknown construct, about 13 meters tall, surrounded by countless damaged machines. And amidst a repeated cluster of rhomboid components, resembling neither jade nor gold. A black stone, only the size of a palm, was bobbing up and down in a terrifying psychic ocean formed by countless psychic fluctuations. This was precisely the alien artifact collectively referred to as shadow light by the Adeptus Mechanicus. At this moment, even Deadpool, an untouchable who was completely immune to psychic power, found it difficult to approach the central area of the experimental hall. He even, uncharacteristically, closed his never-quiet mouth, his gaze fixed on the shadow light, rapidly pondering his next plan. Once Forge Master Teber confirmed that a large number of mechanical constructs designed to suppress psychic fluctuations had completely failed. He immediately informed Commissar Kane beside him of the old method of using human lives to shut down the alien artifact. The core component of the activated shadow light was basically fatal to anyone who touched it. Even if the person possessed psychic potential, they might not survive safely. And Teber's old method was to have everyone sacrifice themselves in a relay fashion. At the moment of their complete death, they would push the core component of the shadow light a small distance, using the sacrifice of countless lives to cause the core component to misalign. And once the core component was completely misaligned, the shadow light would inevitably stop activating the psychic power stored within it. In fact, even if Commissar Kane wanted to object to Forge Master Teber's old method, it was too late. They could vaguely hear the roars of the Chaos Astartes and the booming of bolters. The retreating Astra Militarum soldiers alone could not hold out for long, they had to act quickly. In a flash, Commissar Kane, making a decisive choice, immediately rendered a solemn military salute to the dozen Astra Militarum soldiers with psychic potential. He quickly ordered the people before him to launch a desperate assault towards the shadow light. He and his aide Eugen would be at the back of the group. If all the lives were not enough to fill the gap, Commissar Kane and the others would also have to choose to fight with their lives on the line. Thump, thump, thump. However, at this moment, with a sudden heavy footsteps, Deadpool, who had been quietly listening for a long time, led his mechanical friends on an incredibly difficult expedition towards the shadow light in the center of the experimental hall. With the current density of psychic fluctuations in the surrounding air, even taking a single step forward required immense strength and willpower. And when the bravely advancing Deadpool core had not even gone halfway, the mechanical constructs surrounding Deadpool suffered extremely severe damage and completely collapsed on the metal floor. Deadpool, without looking back, gave a thumbs up to Commissar Kane and the others, who were anxiously watching, and then resolutely continued to step towards the shadow light. Soon after, Deadpool, relying on the Untouchable's ability to suppress psychic fluctuations, barely reached the very bottom of the alien artifact. The moment his hand, clad in mortal power armor, touched one of the rhomboid components of the shadow light, wisps of particle smoke, formed by the constant annihilation of metallic matter, immediately rose up completely. This terrifying decomposition, as if from the spiritual to the material plane. Even the mentally deranged Deadpool couldn't help but let out an incredibly painful wail. But he showed no sign of retreating. Instead, he gritted his teeth and struggled to climb towards the higher core component. Soon after, Deadpool, whose mortal power armor and most of his flesh had been annihilated, finally reached the bobbing core component. However, when Deadpool, with an excited expression, slowly extended a broken hand with exposed pale bones and subconsciously grasped the palm-sized core component. With wide eyes, he couldn't even utter any warning words before his entire being was completely annihilated into countless particle substances. At this moment, the complete failure of Deadpool, the Untouchable, undoubtedly caused Commissar Kane and his group's hearts to sink. But the current situation no longer allowed them to hesitate. Taking a deep breath, Commissar Kane immediately took out all the panacea he had acquired from my Lord Primarch and distributed them one by one to the Astra Militarum soldiers who were about to die. Then, with a casual expression, he raised his hand to stop Forge Master Teber, who was planning to go forward with them. Teber, my dear oil-soaked sister, you don't have to go up. If we, this group, unfortunately fail, then you are the only one who knows the solution, and remember to tell my Lord Primarch for me that I, Cephas Kane, have fulfilled my duty to the Emperor and the Imperium. Thank you for your support. Yesterday's Shishi festival was not for a date, it's because recently, whether due to cervical spine issues or other reasons, I've been experiencing a strange dizzy sensation. It's a moderate level, between unbearable dizziness and a slight discomfort. Yesterday, I was practically in bed all day, and today it's a bit better. I'm still debating whether to go to the hospital for a thorough checkup. Cephas Kane, The Last Stand, Part 8. Commissar Kane's suicide squad slowly advanced towards the alien artifact, the Shadow Light. Psionic fluctuations, their power undiminished, continuously swept over their mortal bodies, slowing their movements and gradually exerting more pressure. But whether it was Commissar Kane, his aide Eugen, or the Astra Militarum soldiers, they all endured with their incredibly resilient will and faith in the Emperor. Just a few minutes later, Commissar Kane and his panting companions successfully reached directly beneath the alien artifact. A cautious Astra Militarum soldier carefully touched the artifact's rhomboid component with a lasgun. Everyone immediately realized that this terrifying phenomenon of matter annihilation was not limited to untouchables, but had to be endured by everyone. So, after a brief discussion, they quickly devised a plan. That was to first have the Astra Militarum soldiers climb onto the various rhomboid components to form a human ladder, allowing Commissar Kane and aide Eugen to quickly ascend. Then, everyone else would climb to the top based on the severity of their injuries, sacrificing their lives to shift the core component out of place. This was not some imperial bureaucracy prioritizing officers. Rather, it was the only choice made by comrades, who shared life and death, to preserve their combat effectiveness. Commissar Kane, with a solemn expression, showed no hesitation or doubt. He abruptly waved his hand, and everyone, nodding heavily, immediately began to quickly climb the rhomboid components, forming a progressively upward human ladder. And every Astra Militarum soldier who touched the surface of the alien artifact with their bare flesh let out an uncontrollable cry of pain. But even as their fingers rapidly turned into mottled white bones, the gritting teeth of the crowd showed no intention of letting go. The next moment, Cephas Kane, his facial muscles taut, and aide Eugen swiftly climbed the human ladder, forged from flesh and will. And once they both reached the top of the alien artifact, they immediately leaned down to pull up the already dying Astra Militarum soldiers below. Even though Commissar Kane had given everyone panacea in advance, the strength of mortal bodies ultimately could not surpass the terrifying speed of matter annihilation. In the end, only the three closest individuals were successfully pulled to the top. The rest of the Astra Militarum soldiers transformed into a large amount of continuously dissipating particle matter. Regrettably, Commissar Kane and the others had no time to grieve or mourn for their fallen comrades. They immediately turned to face the core component, which was emitting countless psionic fluctuations, and initiated their original plan. An Astra Militarum soldier, with only partial flesh and tendons remaining on his arms and thighs, gritted his teeth and stretched out his broken hand towards the floating core artifact. As his entire body rapidly dissipated, the entire core artifact also shifted a few inches outwards. In an instant, both the rampant psionic fluctuations in the surroundings and the towering psionic light pillar directly above significantly diminished. At this moment, the confidence of Commissar Kane and the others instantly surged. The other two severely injured Astra Militarum soldiers, with their last breath, forcibly moved the entire core artifact about half its distance. After countless dissipating particle substances filled the surrounding air, Commissar Kane, with a calm expression, exchanged glances with aide Eugen, who had fought alongside him for decades. The two telepathic old friends simultaneously extended a hand towards the core artifact in front of them. The next moment, Kepha's Cain instantly experienced a pain that pierced deep into his bones and even his soul. His increasingly acute perception even allowed him to clearly feel the detailed process of the flesh and blood inside and outside his body transforming into a large number of particles. In fact, Commissar Cain was now on the brink of life and death. If he simply took that step, he would no longer feel any pain, only peace and tranquility. However, just as Commissar Cain's blurred consciousness completely entered a dying state, he seemed to feel a massive figure, golden and black interweaving, letting out a deafening roar at him. Kepha's Cain, hold on. Instantly, streaks of suddenly appearing dark shadow continuously entanglement around Commissar Cain and Yugen's mortal bodies. Luo Sha's massive shadow clone stood like a metal city wall, resisting external invaders behind the two of them. The next second, Luo Sha, taking a deep breath, forcibly devoured the omnipresent psionic power like a whale. Then he transformed countless psionic powers into a large amount of dark shadow and fiercely impacted the core component of the shadow light. Rumble. Terrifying fluctuations, erupting from the collision and friction of psionic energy, swept towards everything in the surroundings. Every inch of metal floor and a large number of mechanical constructs were almost instantaneously decomposed into infinite particle matter. Even the underground hall where the alien artifact was located suddenly erupted with a terrifying explosion comparable to orbital bombardment, completely obliterating most of the remaining buildings. But at the same time, the massive psionic light pillar that had been soaring into the sky instantly vanished into the Perea sky. After the countless smoke and residual psionic fluctuations dissipated somewhat, at the bottom of the huge pit where the alien artifact was located, a large mass of dark shadow, like a thick dark cloud, slowly floated in midair. Thud. At this moment, the dismembered Commissar Cain and Yugen heavily fell from the depths of the dark shadow onto the scorched earth. But judging from their stable breathing, there were no immediate life-threatening issues. Soon after, the slowly wriggling dark shadow recoalesced into a massive shadow giant, several meters tall. The shadow clone, with a slight frown, tightly gripped the core component of the shadow light with a giant hand, and Luo Sha muttered to himself. Only true psionic beings can safely touch the shadow light, and my shadow clone just passed the verification method of this alien artifact, and it is indeed a creation of the old ones without a doubt. I not only saw those ancient races that looked like toads, but also obtained a set of operating instructions that can safely activate this alien artifact. But unfortunately, the entire operating instruction is composed of the mysterious script of the old ones, which I know nothing about. I even think that even the Emperor might not understand much. So, how many people in the entire Milky Way galaxy know about it? If I want to safely activate this old one artifact, I'm afraid I'll need the full analysis of the Human Empire's government departments, the Mars Mechanic Guild, and even the ancient Eldar, plus the space Necrons and countless other forces. In that case, the difficulty of completely accomplishing this task is not even as great as me personally embarking on an expedition to the Eye of Terror. Thank you all for your support. Chapter 912, Cain's Future. When the dawn of Perea arrived, strands of warm sunlight shone on the entire smoke-filled battlefield, evaporating countless icy dewdrops. One by one, blood-raven youngsters wielding bolt guns and power swords drove their power armor, searching back and forth around the huge pit blasted out by the shadowlight. Once they discovered Chaos Astartes buried beneath the soil with signs of life through their helmet visors, they would immediately step forward to deliver the finishing blow, ending these traitors. Not far away, Sister Superior Jessica, whose injuries had gradually recovered, slowly exhaled. She was pulled up from the rubble of the building by the giant hand of Craig, the leader of the Raven Guard. Just behind several giant Raven Guards carrying transphasic swords, the shattered body of Chaos Commander Galan was evenly scattered within a 100-meter radius. Further away on the battlefield, a large number of wolf cubs from the Space Wolves Great Company were recovering all the living metal of the Necrons for Lehman Russ, while they also assisted some Silver Skull's apothecaries in recovering gene seed. At this moment, as time slowly passed, This great crisis, unexpectedly triggered by Pariah's Mechanicum, was completely erased by the Legion of the Damned. Although Rowdy lost a small number of Astartes. But the harvest of just the ancient holy relic alone was enough to make up for any losses. Even though Rowdy was currently unable to safely activate this big thing. Before long, when Rowdy, casually playing with the core components of the Shadowlight, successfully returned to the city of Pariah. A smart control legion and a large number of automatic servo robots were teleported from the Hero Tower in near-Earth orbit to the surface. Their mission was to completely transport all the components of the ancient holy relic to the interior of the Hero Tower and find a safe space to store them. AI Stark and Leman Russ would also occasionally study it, hoping to find some inspiration from the ancient creation. During this period, Commissar Kane and Jurgen, who had suffered serious injuries, successively awoke from their comatose state. Faced with the temptation of the apothecaries and Leman Russ, Commissar Kane naturally chose to use panaceas to restore his broken limbs and injuries. After careful consideration, his adjutant Jurgen decided to follow Leman Russ's advice and install the latest model of mechanical prosthetics. Rowdy didn't say much about this, and Leman Russ personally forged a batch of vibranium mechanical prosthetics, and built in many functions and gave them to Jurgen. At this point, the vast majority of the people and wounded on Pariah officially entered the post-war recovery period. And the Legion of the Damned fleet, which had obtained a large amount of material replenishment and completed personnel rest, was about to embark on the road of cruising. However, before Rowdy left Pariah, he also secretly summoned Chaffaz Kane, whose injuries had completely recovered. Inside the bright and huge palace, Rowdy, whose huge body was supported above the ground by a large number of mechanical tentacles, was playing with the core components of the Shadowlight back and forth. Between his repeatedly jumping fingers, strands of dark shadows were slowly pouring into the depths of the core components. Even though Rowdy was currently unable to truly activate the ancient holy relic. But the core components could be used as a special creation to store a huge amount of psychic energy. On weekdays, he could slowly pour a large amount of dark shadow power into it, and then extract it all at once when using it. At this moment, with a subtle sound of footsteps that was not loud, Chaffaz Kane, whose expression and state were more indifferent, slowly came to the interior of the empty palace. Primarch, I have bypassed the field of vision of all the guards, and I have not revealed to anyone the news of my arrival here. Is there any secret mission for you to summon me with such great fanfare? As soon as Commissar Kane's words fell, Rowdy, who slightly turned his gaze, looked down at the mortal officer below and said, Chaffaz Kane, are you just planning to stay on Pariah and be a commissar for the rest of your life? Don't you want to stand higher? You must know that power is neither good nor bad. Only when you stand high enough can you do more things and help more citizens of the Imperium. At this moment, Rowdy's words made Commissar Kane subconsciously reveal a wry smile. The other party shook his head and said, Primarch, if you say that I don't want to be promoted, that's a lie, but I also think that my mentality and personality may not be able to take on important positions at a higher level. I may not be able to face the scene where countless mortal warriors bravely die because of a wrong order of mine. However, since Rowdy secretly summoned Commissar Kane, then he naturally had plans. I saw Rowdy continue to say, Kane, you haven't tried it yet, so you think you will fail. I don't think so. I won't beat around the bush with you. It will take decades at the fastest, and hundreds of years at the slowest. I want you to gradually take the position of Grand Marshal of the Astra Militarum and enter the High Council of Terra to become one of the 13 High Lords. At this moment, Rowdy's deep words made Chaffaz Kane couldn't help but widen his eyes. His lips trembled back and forth for a moment, and finally the whole person asked in a hoarse voice. Primarch, why me? I don't think I'm that special. And facing Commissar Kane's doubts and inquiries, Rowdy, squinting his eyes, took a deep breath and said, To tell you the truth, on the one hand, it is because you yourself have indeed received the Emperor's attention and love, and on the other hand, it is also because I, this Dark Regent, plans to go deep into the Sol system. Don't worry, Lord Regent Gilliman will agree with my decision, he even can't wait for me to share some political affairs for him. Moreover, according to the intelligence information I have received so far, the reason why Lord Regent Gilliman's second stage of the Indemitis Crusade has repeatedly suffered disastrous defeats is on the one hand because the strength of many alien forces has gradually become tyrannical, but on the other hand, it is also because of the despicable means secretly used by some High Lords. Alas, the air on Terra is dirty again, and I need to clean it up myself. Rowdy's words slowly echoed in Chaffez Kane's ears. Commissar Kane's face changed back and forth for a while. He seemed to have finally made an important choice, and the whole person slowly knelt on one knee towards Rowdy's direction. Respected Dark Regent, if you really need my help, then Chaffez Kane will naturally not refuse. I am willing to take on the important responsibilities you have given me and become a sharp sword in the hands of the Primarch to escort the human empire and the Emperor. Believe me, Kane, you will not regret this decision. Thank you for your support. Damao is really abstract. Marshal, Wangu village is here. Soon after, Luo Shah's secret summons of Chaffez Kane temporarily came to an end. Just as Luo Shah had previously revealed, this might be a lengthy career plan that could take decades, or even a century, to complete. Although there are currently 2 Primarch regents supporting him, the resistance from the High Lords is not something to be underestimated. Unless Luo Shah immediately descends upon Terra and orders the Astartes to point their bolters at the heads of every High Lord. Otherwise, he can only systematically arrange Chaffez Kane's path to promotion through various means. In fact, due to Luo Shah's continuous support and touring over the years, in addition to his natural advantage as a Primarch, he has also accumulated a considerable network of connections. Even if Luo Shah himself might not be aware of some of these connections. But as the saying goes, what is thought of, will have an echo. Perhaps in the future these connections can solve many problems for Luo Shah. Rumble. One massive metal ship after another slowly departed from Peria's near orbit. The Calamity Legion's ships, large and small, formed a defensive formation around the even larger Hero Tower, and then the entire fleet immediately began its journey into the depths of the cold void. And when more successive psychic distress calls once again echoed through the flagship's astropathic chamber, almost every Astartes company returned to their daily routine of support and return missions. Even Luo Shah, as the fleet master, progressively intensified his recovery and exercise regimen for his massive body. Currently, most of his physique has successfully returned to normal, with only some muscle tissues still seemingly regrowing. Facing this situation, Luo Shah did not appear overly anxious. He intended to systematically lead the giant Raven Guards with his shadow clone to perform more prayer support missions. However, just as everyone was fully prepared and about to open the portal, buzz, buzz, buzz. With a sudden buzzing sound, an Eldar webway portal abruptly appeared within Luo Shah's field of vision. Instantly, 5 quick-reacting giant Raven Guards immediately stepped forward, activating their vibranium power armor. They gripped glowing super-phase swords tightly in their palms, firmly surrounding the unstable webway portal. Boom! The next second, a tall figure, whose vibranium power armor was covered in various scratches and battle damage, somewhat awkwardly burst out from inside the webway portal. Don't shoot. We're all on the same side. As the webway portal vanished instantly into the air, Wild Wolf Luo Shah, baring his teeth and raising his head, immediately saw several menacing giant Raven Guards standing before him. And Craig, who had previously met this Primarch's clone, quickly waved his massive hand, signaling the surrounding giant battle brothers to lower their weapons and make way. Long time no see, you wolf cub. Why are you being chased so frantically? And why isn't Cypher with you? I remember the last time you left, didn't you say you were going to seize Huron Blackheart's Blackstone Fortress? At this moment, the Primarch, unable to suppress a faint smile, gazed at Wild Wolf Luo Shah, who was rising from the metal floor, and teased him. Russ's leg hair. Primarch, don't even mention the Blackstone Fortress, seriously, don't bring it up. Wild Wolf Luo Shah, his face visibly worsening at an alarming rate, vigorously shook his disheveled head. He instinctively bared his pristine white fangs and spoke to the Primarch seated on the metal throne. The first phase went very smoothly. Cypher and I infiltrated the Blackstone Fortress alone, and while the Red Corsair traders and Huron Blackheart himself were absent, we forcibly took control of the entire war vehicle. If we had just calmly tried to steal the Blackstone Fortress at that point, then all the subsequent events wouldn't have happened. The Blackstone Fortress held a group of Astartes prisoners from various warbands. I released them based on the principle of absorbing combat power, letting them fight the remaining Red Corsairs, but I didn't realize that among those Astartes was a fanatical Dark Angels Inner Circle member hidden. As soon as he saw Cypher, he secretly contacted the Dark Angels battle group. By the time we finally managed to pilot the stolen Blackstone Fortress back into the real universe, those damnable Dark Angels were already waiting for us, controlling the fortress monastery. I even suspect it was a planned ambush. Because it's said that the Dark Angels Fortress Monastery rarely crosses stellar systems. Anyway, what happened next was an absolute mess. Huron, the Red Corsair Lord, caught up with his pursuers. In the end, we not only lost the Blackstone Fortress but were also chased all over the place by the Dark Angels Inner Circle. Even more humiliating is that this time, Cypher truly suffered a major setback. He's now captured by the Dark Angels, which is one of the reasons I had no choice but to come back to you. At this moment, Wild Wolf Luo Shaw's string of words had just ended. Luo Shaw, with a slight frown, immediately manipulated countless mechanical tentacles to move his massive body down from the metal throne. He also endured Wild Wolf Luo Shaw's strange gaze and continued to ask. Cypher was captured by the Dark Angels. Didn't you mention my name as a Primarch and Dark Side Regent? However, the moment Primarch Luo Shaw's words left his mouth, Wild Wolf Luo Shaw, raising an eyebrow, couldn't help but sneer. Heh, you want to hear it? I can vividly describe what the Dark Angels did. Let's just say, if I didn't have my beast instincts and wasn't fast enough, I'd most likely be rotting in a black dungeon with Cypher and many battle brothers right now. I'm afraid that among the Dark Angels today, let alone a Primarch, even the Emperor himself appearing wouldn't help. Although Wild Wolf Luo Shaw's words inevitably contained resentment and exaggeration, the events he described still caused the Primarch to fall silent. After only a brief moment, Luo Shaw, with an indifferent expression, immediately spoke. No matter what, Cypher must be rescued. I'm still counting on him to find Lionel Johnson's whereabouts. Wolf Cub, where is Cypher currently being held? Is his life in immediate danger? Craig, immediately notify the Space Wolves and the Black Templars to prepare for battle. Also, tell Tiberos and Titus that the Calamity Legion is to maintain its current patrol mission until I issue further orders. Seeing that the Primarch had already begun issuing orders, the Wolf Cub took a deep breath and shook his head slightly, saying with a serious expression. I believe Cypher won't die easily, even if he wants to. At the very least, the Inner Circle guys won't kill him before he truly repents, but physical suffering is inevitable. As for where he's currently imprisoned, I guess it should be inside the Fortress Monastery. If we're going to rescue him, we'll have to take him from the Dark Angels battle group. Although I don't want to overstep Lionel Johnson in disciplining his bloodline descendants, since they've provoked us now, we'll hit them hard and use this opportunity to clear out some of the Inner Circle fanatics. I hope the members of the Dark Angels battle group can be more clear-headed, otherwise, in the future, I'll have no choice but to tell Lionel Johnson that the Dark Angels battle group was personally subjected to excommunication traitorous by me. Thank you all for your support. In the Obscurus starfield, Calixus sector. Between the cold void, a massive super war fortress was slowly drifting along an unknown course. Dark Angels battle group capital ships were scattered in a loose fan shape around the surrounding void, subtly forming layers of impenetrable defensive formations. This super war fortress was the legendary mobile monastery of the Dark Angels, the Fortress Monastery. It was also the planetary remnant of their former home world, Caliban, left in the real universe. Of course, the secrecy of this matter was like the inner circle and the fallen angel, it could be said that whoever mentioned it would die. Thump, thump, thump. Deep within the secret, complex, and winding paths of the fortress monastery, a sound of footsteps gradually echoed from far to near. A tall figure clad in dark green power armor was moving through the silent and deep architectural passages. This individual was the current Supreme Grand Master of the Dark Angels Battle Group, the Guardian of Truth, Chapter Master Azrael. And behind him, a short figure, holding a red-winged helmet and draped in a green robe, followed closely. At this moment, the solemn-faced Azrael seemed to be preoccupied with his thoughts. He swiftly moved his power armor through a long, winding, silent passage, entering the core area deeper within the fortress monastery. During this time, bright and dark scanning waves continuously swept across Azrael's tall body, and numerous weapon turrets, already poised for action, returned to standby mode. Such dense and terrifying defensive measures undoubtedly indirectly proved that the security level of the entire fortress monastery had far exceeded normal imagination. Soon after, as a thick metal door, strong enough to withstand melta explosions and even lance bombardments, slowly opened. Azrael and his Dark Watcher's servant entered a dimly lit, empty room. Judging from the blood-stained metal floor and the torture instruments almost covering the entire wall, this was likely a place where the Dark Angels battle group entertained their distinguished guests. Asmodai, where is he? At this moment, the solemn-faced Azrael suddenly asked. His voice had barely echoed throughout the empty room. From a dimly lit corner, a continuous roar of a massive engine suddenly erupted. An ancient, sacred dreadnought slowly moved its heavy steps. Its massive mechanical body, about 5 meters tall, heavily stepped into the center of the room. I am thanking him for his warm hospitality back then. If you count the time, he has already broken the breath-holding record set by other fallen angel. As the low voice from the sacred dreadnought Asmodai resonated in Azrael's ears, the previously empty metal floor suddenly flipped outwards. Huge, thick mechanical arms rapidly extended from beneath the metal floor. They also directly fished out a hollow adamantium sarcophagus from a large amount of icy cold water. The next second, an extremely urgent gasp immediately came from within the hollow adamantium sarcophagus. Asmodai. My previous order was to lock him up, not to subject him to a confession interrogation. Azrael, with a hint of anger flashing in his eyes, reprimanded the sacred dreadnought in a low voice. However, before Azrael could continue speaking, a burst of uncontrollable mocking laughter suddenly came from within the hollow sarcophagus not far away. Ha ha. At this moment, Azrael, hearing the laughter, couldn't help but frown. He slowly moved his power armor forward. With each step he took, the flipped metal floor panels automatically returned to their original position, completely covering the biting cold water beneath the floor. Fallen angel, what are you laughing at? Azrael arrived in front of the hollow sarcophagus. His gaze fixed on the naked figure firmly confined within. Ha ha, you actually ask me what I'm laughing at. Given Asmodai's past actions, in any warband, even a chaos warband, he would have been executed long ago, but he still lives among the Dark Angels, and he lives well. My dear Supreme Grand Master, what do you think I'm laughing at? The mysterious prisoner's low voice undoubtedly made Azrael's expression visibly worsen. However, his experience and insight as a superior allowed him to quickly adjust his mindset. My Lord Cypher, a fellow who chose to fall has no right to meddle in the internal affairs of the warband. How many people have we lost over the years just to capture you? Do you think only the sacred dreadnought Asmodai wants to entertain you? Or rather, do you think you can last long in this sunless cage? Azrael coldly said to my Lord Cypher, who was confined by the adamantium sarcophagus. However, his threatening words did not cause any extra emotional fluctuations in the other party. Whoosh! An eye belonging to my Lord Cypher suddenly pressed against a hollow part of the adamantium sarcophagus. Deep within the bloodshot eyes, streaks of purple and blue light seemed to shimmer. He stared fixedly at Azrael, who stood outside, and said in a hoarse voice, I can tell you clearly, I will not die no matter what. This is not only because I have already appeared in your Dark Angels battle group's history, but more importantly, you have probably already realized my other identity, haven't you? Heh. As old friends with deep ties, I also advise you, it's fine to torment me for a short time, but if you dare to lay hands on those wolf brothers and other captured Astartes, don't blame me for not warning you. This 22 Primarch, Dark Side Regent my lord's style of action is quite like Lionel Johnson's back then, even surpassing him. You'd best pray that you can truly control your fanatical inner circle, otherwise, I fear the fortress monastery will run red with blood. Cypher's low words slowly echoed in the ears of everyone present. The sacred dreadnought Asmodai suddenly shook his massive mechanical body, wanting to immediately step forward and act. But he was abruptly stopped by Azrael, whose face rapidly worsened, raising his hand. He seemed to be silent for a moment, then suddenly moved his power armor closer to the hollow sarcophagus. My lord Cypher, do you think that just because you have donned the outer shell of a Primarch's clone, I cannot deal with you? You even dare to use a Primarch to pressure me. To tell you the truth, even if Regent Gilliman himself came to the fortress monastery, our Dark Angels battle group would have nothing to fear. However, at this moment, Israel's harsh words only received Cypher's lukewarm response. Perhaps you Dark Angels have gone too far. I just hope that when the Primarch personally comes to find you, you won't cry. Thank you for your support. Rumble. Just as Azrael and Lord Cypher were having a deep discussion, in front of the slowly drifting fortress monastery and the large escort fleet's path, a massive warp gate suddenly appeared. The next second, a rhombus-shaped hero tower, with a total volume only 1/3 the size of the fortress monastery, slowly emerged from the warp. Instantly, one metal vessel after another immediately turned their weapon arrays and unleashed a barrage of fire towards the hero tower. Under the countless lasers and lances, the hero tower, which instantly raised a thick void shield, did not emit any identification codes to distinguish friend from foe. Instead, it suddenly increased its engine power and charged directly towards the fortress monastery. Humming. Almost at the same time, as massive, colorful energy beams rapidly poured into the cold void. A colossal illusory dragon, the T-Online Divine Beast, was completely summoned into the reality of the universe. Immediately after, a terrifying figure, whose robust body was encased in full vibranium power armor and shrouded in a pitch-black shadow, leapt from the upper deck of the hero tower into the interior of the T-Online Divine Beast. At this moment, the T-Online Divine Beast, seemingly having gained sentience, let out a silent roar, then swiftly launched a void soar towards the fortress monastery. And whether it was the fortress monastery or the large number of capital ships around it, it seemed they were encountering a warp creature for the first time that was comparable in size to a juvenile void whale but would actively launch a fierce attack. In an instant, countless lasers and lances, traversing the cold void, launched an interception towards the approaching T-Online Divine Beast under the cover of numerous space torpedoes. However, the terrifying figure, who had successfully manipulated the T-Online Divine Beast, dodged countless barrages of fire with a swaying motion. Finally, the T-Online Divine Beast's illusory claws heavily struck the fortress monastery's void shield. At the same time, just as the numerous Dark Angels mortal captains and the fortress monastery's weapon array platforms focused their attention entirely on the T-Online Divine Beast. With an inconspicuous azure teleportation light, the terrifying figure, originally hidden within the T-Online Divine Beast, forcibly passed through the void shield, which could block endless firepower, and directly entered the interior of the fortress monastery. And the undissipated T-Online Divine Beast continued to launch relentless, frenzied attacks on the fortress monastery and the main fleet. Boom! Luo Shah's vibranium magnetic boots landed heavily on the metal floor, making an extremely loud crashing sound. One by one, the Dark Angels, who were nervously preparing for battle, immediately activated their power armor and surrounded him. The bolters they gripped in their palms were firmly locked onto the massive figure that had appeared instantly. I am Luo Shah, the Dark Side Regent, the 22nd Primarch of the Imperium. Let your chapter master come see me. At this moment, Luo Sha, wearing a skull helmet, slightly shifted his massive body, which hadn't moved with full force in a long time. He roared to the people around him in a low voice. However, until Luo Sha's words completely dissipated into the slightly stuffy air of the fortress monastery. Among the Astartes present, only a portion of the Primaris Dark Angels, wearing new power armor, subconsciously lowered the bolters and power weapons in their palms. I repeat, let your chapter master come see me, otherwise the Dark Angels battle group will be considered rebellious, and I, as a Primarch, will personally send you to meet the Emperor. Luo Sha, who had intended to give the Dark Angels battle group a show of force, did not exude much goodwill. As soon as his voice fell, wisp after wisp of constantly escaping pitch-black shadow writhed back and forth on his massive body, as if more terrifying monsters would leap out of them to devour everyone the next second. I am Ezekiel, Grand Master of the Dark Angels Librarium. My Lord Dark Side Regent has personally descended upon the fortress monastery, and we naturally come to greet you. At this moment, waves of invisible psychic fluctuations forced the surrounding Dark Angels to lower the muzzles of their bolters and immediately kneel on one knee. Immediately after, a tall figure, wearing Artificer power armor, quickly jogged to Luo Sha's front. Respected Primarch my lord, Supreme Grand Master Azrael is on his way here. You do not need to bother with these new recruits who have only recently completed their training. They are not familiar with the legends and stories of the Primarchs. Ezekiel, the librarian, slowly knelt on one knee before Luo Sha, speaking cautiously. And Luo Sha turned his skull helmet, sweeping his cold gaze over the Dark Angels veterans whose shoulder plates were painted with their military ranks and battle orders. He subconsciously let out a cold laugh. Heh heh. You Dark Angels had better be as you say. At this moment, Luo Sha's low words slowly echoed in the ears of every Astartes. And Librarian Ezekiel had no intention of continuing the conversation. Thus, the awkward atmosphere between the two sides seemed to have completely cooled down. Even Luo Sha, who had always been amiable towards any Astartes battle group, neither allowed the Dark Angels to rise from the ground, nor did his massive body show any intention of leaving its original spot. And just as this solemn atmosphere continued for a long time, a tall figure wearing Artificer power armor quickly arrived from deeper within the fortress monastery. Azrael, Supreme Grand Master of the Dark Angels, greets my Lord Dark Side Regent. The other party knelt on one knee towards Luo Sha, who stood rooted to the spot, without much hesitation, offering the greetings of an Astartes son. And Luo Sha, who had waited for a long time, did not stand on ceremony with the other party. He slowly removed the skull helmet that covered his entire head. His cold gaze looked down at Azrael and Ezekiel in front of him and said faintly, I guess you should know why I've come to find you Dark Angels, right? Do I still need to be blunt with you? As soon as Luo Sha's words fell, Azrael, with a solemn expression, immediately raised his head and said to Luo Sha, Respected Primarch my lord, how about we move to another location for a detailed discussion? This is, after all, the place of the Battle Brothers, and some secrets need not be known to them. However, Azrael's words were not yet finished. Luo Sha, whose bronze face showed no emotional changes, directly raised his hand and interrupted him. I see that you Dark Angels are incorrigible. It is true that every warband has its own secrets, but you alone have completely glorified this special behavior, even to the point of being incurable. Or are you saying that without Lionel Johnson's suppression, you believe that the current Dark Angels are an irreplaceable existence? Do you think I came here today just for a mere Lord Cypher? I can tell you clearly, I came for the countless mortals and Astartes battle brothers who have been harmed by you Inner Circle fanatics. I will seek justice for them. I also wish you would immediately rise up and resist me, so that I can justifiably kill all of you scum. Thank you all for your support. Chapter 916, Inner Circle Chaos, Asmodai. Even with Luo Sha's blatant malice towards the Dark Angels battle group now, not a single Astartes dared to step forward and confront a powerful Primarch brewing with thunderous rage. Not even those inner circle fanatics still hidden among the crowd were an exception. So, when Luo Sha's low voice slowly echoed in everyone's ears, Azrael and Ezekiel's attitudes became even more humble and respectful. If it came to fear, they might not have felt much of it themselves. But Luo Sha, a Primarch walking in the real universe, especially one bearing the heavy responsibility of Dark Side Regent, represented more than just what was outwardly apparent. Engaging in some ideological disputes with a Primarch might be harmless. However, choosing to attack a Primarch would mean that the current Dark Angels were fundamentally no different from the fallen angels they had long pursued. Yet, facing such an obedient situation from a large number of Dark Angels, Luo Sha was somewhat disappointed. He had originally hoped that the Inner Circle fanatics would jump out and attack him, so he could legitimately wipe out the entire Inner Circle's existence. Even if this meant that most of the Dark Angels' veterans would become sacrifices, a bone-scraping treatment naturally required heavy-handedness. At this moment, an extremely solemn atmosphere enveloped the heads of every Dark Angel. Luo Sha, whose massive body stood in place, turned his head and scanned the kneeling crowd. He slowly took a deep breath and had to secretly admit that his idea of provoking the Inner Circle and even the Dark Angels in this way was too naive. Thus, with his thoughts turning, Luo Sha immediately ordered Azrael to lead him to greet Lord Cypher, who was imprisoned. Perhaps Cypher's return could provide an opportunity to break the current stalemate. Facing the command from the Primarch, Azrael, who seemed to have slightly relaxed, quickly stood up, driving his power armor without any hesitation. With a respectful expression, he and Grand Master Librarian Ezekiel guided the esteemed Primarch my lord along the passage route deep into the fortress monastery. As the three continued to pass through complex and winding passages, gradually delving deeper into the fortress monastery, Luo Sha, who was already incredibly sensitive to psychic fluctuations, vaguely sensed something constantly calling for his approach. Click. However, at this moment, just as Luo Sha was slightly distracted, Azrael, who was originally performing identity verification scans according to previous habits, suddenly looked with shock at the surrounding weapon platforms that were rapidly turning their gun muzzles. And Ezekiel, standing beside him, also had a sudden change in expression. Countless psychic energies instantly surged from within his tall body, firmly enveloping the three in an extremely thick psychic shield. Boom boom boom. In an instant, laser beams and solid projectiles constantly streaked across the air, repeatedly bursting within everyone's field of vision, and countless explosions of fire completely illuminated their faces. Israel's face had now become incredibly unsightly. The erratic movement of the weapon platforms indicated that a special, uncontrollable change had occurred within the Dark Angels. Ezekiel, with a taut face, was gritting his teeth to maintain the psychic shield. He did not believe that he and Azrael would suffer a mishap in such a trivial matter. The safety of Primarch my lord was the top priority. At this moment, it was Luo Sha, who had completely recovered, who slowly revealed a cold smile on his bronze-colored face. Azrael, don't blame me for not warning you, your people attacked me first. Wolf Cub, it's your turn to enter the fray. No sooner had Luo Sha's voice fallen. In the cold depths of space outside the fortress monastery, the firefight between the Hero Tower and the Dark Angels fleet, which had just ceased, resumed. As for the interior of the fortress monastery, with the sudden appearance of streaks of azure-blue teleportation barriers, Astartes companies from the Space Wolves and Black Templars also quickly revealed their tall figures. And the leading commanders were Wild Wolf Luo Sha, who had a Breaker Warhammer and a blood-red great axe respectively on his heavy shoulder plates. Primarch my lord has commanded, those who kneel and surrender, regardless of their identity, will be dealt with leniently, but any who stubbornly resist will be killed without mercy. Wild Wolf Luo Sha gazed back and forth at the large number of Dark Angels veterans rapidly raising their bolters within his field of vision. A bloodthirsty, sinister smile couldn't help but appear at the corner of his mouth. Almost simultaneously, Luo Sha, with tendrils of dark shadow flickering across his massive body, had already made his move. Countless shadow clones he had condensed forcibly destroyed the surrounding weapon platforms. After a large amount of metal debris fell to the ground, Luo Sha, with an indifferent expression, looked down at the ashen-faced Azrael and Ezekiel, and asked faintly, "I need you to submit a list of Inner Circle traitors to me, otherwise, not many of your Dark Angels battle group will be left." At this moment, facing the Primarch's low voice, which contained both firmness and threat. After taking a deep breath, Azrael, who had gradually regained his composure, looked up and said, "Dark Side Regent my lord, currently within the entire Dark Angels, only 6 senior members of the Inner Circle have the qualified identity and corresponding ability to control the Fortress Monastery. They are called Secret Masters. They are I, Grand Master Librarian Ezekiel, Holy Master Saifel, Grand Master Belial of the Deathwing, Grand Master Samael of the Ravenwing, and Master Asmodai of Repentance. Currently, Grand Master Belial of the Deathwing and Grand Master Samael of the Ravenwing are not inside the Fortress Monastery, and I and Ezekiel are by your side, so now the only remaining suspects are Holy Master Saifel and Master Asmodai of Repentance. And among them, the biggest suspect is Asmodai." At this very moment, no sooner had Israel's voice fallen. Luo Sha, whose cold gaze deeply fixated on the other party, sneered and said, "It's him again, you should have dealt with Asmodai long ago. How much trouble has this madman brought to the Dark Angels? You, the Grand Master of the Warband, know best. Primarch my lord, Asmodai is the oldest ancient warrior in the entire Dark Angels. We are merely listening to the teachings of an ancient elder, even if the elder's insane teachings will bring ruin to the Dark Angels." Ezekiel, who had been silent for a long time, suddenly spoke towards Luo Sha. And Luo Sha, slowly driving his vibranium power armor, said without turning his head, "If you had fully listened to Lionel Johnson's teachings back then, would the Dark Angels have reached their current situation? Everything must be broken down before it can be rebuilt, only then can it be reborn from fire. Thank you all for your support." Just as Luo Sha and the other two, rapidly moving through the winding passages, were about to approach the Fortress Monastery's black prison where my Lord Cypher was held. A series of heavy footsteps, growing closer, quickly entered their ears. The next second, dozens of silent Inner Circle veterans appeared. Before Azrael could even speak, these Astartes immediately pulled the triggers of the bolters clutched in their hands, unleashing an incredibly insane barrage of fire towards the Primarch and the others. However, at this moment, Grand Master Librarian Ezekiel, his expression growing colder, acted before Luo Sha. Streaks of incredibly brilliant psychic power lightning suddenly leapt from his palms. The terrifying psychic power attacks, after cutting through the air, completely blasted the Inner Circle traitors within everyone's line of sight into charred human figures emitting wisps of smoke. Even though every Inner Circle veteran was an Astartes elite personally selected by Azrael and Ezekiel. But facing the current dangerous situation and the Primarch my lord's personal supervision, they had no choice but to strike down their former comrades. Just then, Luo Sha, frowning slightly, instinctively flared his nostrils. He suddenly turned his head and said to Azrael, whose expression remained solemn, "I'm afraid the changes in the Fortress Monastery are not just Asmodai causing trouble. I faintly smell the stench of chaos psychic power on these Inner Circle traitors. What other unexpected things are imprisoned or stored inside your Fortress Monastery?" Luo Sha's words, growing increasingly serious, had just fallen. Azrael, who was observing the situation ahead, said without turning his head, "Primarch my lord, you should also know the true origin of the Fortress Monastery. This massive fortress contains a large number of ancient creations or weapons and equipment related to the Warp or Chaos Demon. However, most of these things are not managed by the Dark Angels battle group, but are entrusted to those mysterious green-robed short people, the Dark Watchers, to guard for us. They are very difficult to be corrupted by chaos, so they are far more suitable for long-term guardianship than us," Azrael said to Luo Sha. Immediately after, seeing that there were no Inner Circle traitors left, the three quickly activated the power armor on their bodies and rushed towards the black prison where my Lord Cypher was located. Soon after, Luo Sha and the others finally arrived at the Black Prison's location. But they immediately saw the broken metal door, forcibly breached from the inside, and the now empty, hollow sarcophagus. Primarch my lord, this level of damage must belong to a sacred dreadnought, and there isn't much blood in the hollow sarcophagus, which means my lord Cypher is still alive. At this moment, Azrael, his expression grave, knelt on one knee in his power armor. He carefully examined the clues left within the entire prison. But I still don't understand, if Asmodai hates my lord Cypher so much, why didn't he kill him on the spot? Why did he take him away directly instead? Israel's words caused Luo Sha to fall into temporary thought. He muttered to himself, what do we know so far? Did your inner circle veterans rebel because of excessive psychological pressure caused by my arrival here, or due to other factors? Or does Asmodai, the most suspected rebel, have other motives? Or is the true culprit behind the rebellion someone else entirely? Just then, Azrael suddenly rose in his power armor. After exchanging a glance with Ezekiel, he immediately said to Luo Sha, Primarch my lord, we cannot get any answers by mere speculation, but there is another way. The Dark Watchers know everything inside the fortress monastery better. Perhaps we can learn some truth from them. At this moment, after Azrael obtained the Primarch's permission, he immediately summoned the Dark Watchers through an extremely mysterious and complex communication code. Soon after, with a rustling of tiny footsteps, a dozen small, green-robed Dark Watchers quickly arrived at the location. However, what surprised and amazed everyone present was this. The newly appeared Dark Watchers immediately performed a kneeling ritual towards Luo Sha, only fully rising when the Primarch raised his hand to stop them. Primarch my lord, they ask me to convey to you that the Dark Watchers welcome your arrival immensely. Azrael, who is more familiar with the Dark Watchers, took on the important responsibility of translating the language. He slowly spoke to Luo Sha, word by word. They said they have already guessed the purpose of our summoning them. A sudden great disaster is continuously spreading within the fortress monastery. The bloody slaughter initiated by the Primarch's arrival cannot solve any problems for the Dark Angels, because the end of all things lies in the past, not the present. As for the true source of this great disaster, it is not Master of Repentance Asmodai, nor the many Inner Circle traitors, but one of the Warp 3 divine artifacts sealed within the fortress monastery 10,000 years ago, the Tuchucha engine. A warp divine artifact, the Tuchucha engine. What kind of strange thing is that? Luo Sha, frowning slightly, immediately turned his cold gaze. He stared at Azrael and Ezekiel, whose facial expressions had subtly changed, and asked. And Azrael, who instinctively widened his eyes and took a deep breath, said to Luo Sha with a grave expression. Primarch my lord, the Tuchucha engine is a warp divine artifact discovered by our Gene Father Lionel Johnson in the Perditus star system during the Great Heresy. It was the existence of this warp divine artifact that helped Lionel Johnson solve the immense problem of precise navigation for his entire fleet during a warp storm. After Lionel Johnson's unfortunate disappearance, this warp divine artifact was sealed inside the fortress monastery by the previous Grand Master, and we had almost forgotten its existence. But later, for some unknown reason, a rumor circulated for a while within the Dark Angels battle group. The specific content was that if the Warp Divine Artifact Tuchucha engine were gathered with the other two Warp 3 Divine Artifacts, Ouroboros and Plagueheart, it could generate a terrifying power that allows one to travel through time and return to the past, even enough to change the entire history of the human empire. And if my memory serves me correctly, not only the Tuchucha engine, but also Ouroboros and Plagueheart, these two Warp Divine Artifacts, are also inside the Fortress Monastery. Thank you for your support. Wild Wolf Lehman Russ was launching a battle charge with astonishing momentum. The Forgebreaker Warhammer, clutched tightly in his palm, fell heavily, accompanied by an extremely piercing hum. With just one strike, several Inner Circle veterans who had come forward to besiege him were severely wounded, their bodies entangled in strands of lightning. The next moment, Wild Wolf Lehman Russ's magnetic boots paused slightly. The blood-red great axe, gripped in his other hand, suddenly cleaved forward, completely splitting several Inner Circle veterans who had pounced on him into pieces of flesh and blood. At the same time, large numbers of Astartes from the Space Wolves and Black Templars were engaged in more intense combat with the Inner Circle veterans who were rising up in resistance or coming to support them. One after another, bolter rounds streaked through the air, erupting in bursts of explosive fire on the power armor of both sides. Chainswords with buzzing, razor-sharp teeth and power swords with activated disruption fields collided continuously, showering sparks. However, even though every Inner Circle veteran of the Dark Angels was an elite force among the Astartes, they had no advantage whatsoever compared to the traitor legions, whose individual weapons and special equipment were several levels higher than those of ordinary Astartes chapters. Moreover, not all Dark Angels were mind-controlled Inner Circle members. A considerable number of Primaris Astartes and Dark Angels veterans who were already dissatisfied with the Inner Circle did not launch counterattacks against the Primaris Astartes. After briefly distinguishing friend from foe on the chaotic battlefield, they immediately joined the ranks of the traitor legions. It seemed that compared to the secretive Dark Angels command hierarchy, many Dark Angels had more faith in Leman Russ, the Primarch with the title of Regent of the Dark Side. Rumble. Just then, squads of Inner Circle veterans surging out from the depths of the fortress monastery's passages had brought with them a large number of heavy firepower weapons. Countless whirlwind bolter explosions and melta beams crisscrossed the battlefield. Many Space Wolves and Black Templars Astartes, even if they instantly erected adamantine energy shields, still suffered visible casualties. At this moment, Wild Wolf Leman Russ, with his unparalleled swift reaction, sensed a change in the battlefield situation. He immediately activated his power armor, crossed the chaotic battlefield alone, and launched a terrifying charge against the heavy firepower squads of the Inner Circle veterans. However, the vast majority of the later Inner Circle veterans had already sensed the deadly threat posed by Wild Wolf Leman Russ, whose combat power was astonishing. They quickly abandoned their heavy firepower weapons and turned to retreat into the complex passages of the fortress monastery, seemingly not intending to engage in any degree of combat with Wild Wolf Leman Russ. And Wild Wolf Leman Russ, who was clearly already bloodthirsty, did not pay too much attention to the problems revealed by the enemy's behavior. Instead, he more excitedly brandished the Forgebreaker Warhammer and the blood-red Great Axe, continuing to pursue the enemy. But soon, the reckless Wild Wolf Leman Russ paid the price for it. After the Inner Circle veterans, who were more familiar with the environment, successfully lured Wild Wolf Leman Russ into a spacious square. In an instant, a large number of pre-placed melta bombs suddenly erupted in devastatingly hot flames, engulfing Wild Wolf Leman Russ with endless shockwaves. And Wild Wolf Leman Russ, who subconsciously took a deep breath, activated the teleportation function inside his power armor without hesitation. He intended to use this to evade the almost fatal melta trap in front of him. Rumble. However, after the azure teleportation light that enveloped his vision completely dissipated, what appeared before Wild Wolf Leman Russ was another extremely bizarre scene. Only to see a large number of taciturn Inner Circle veterans carefully dressing Cypher Leman Russ, who was stark naked, in a suit of artificer power armor. And behind everyone, a strange mechanical creation resembling an Ouroboros was emitting a large amount of chaos warp energy. Ah, welcome, avatar of my lord. If you don't mind, you can wait here for a moment, things will be over soon. At this moment, an extremely unfamiliar, deep voice quickly reached Wild Wolf Leman Russ's ears. And Wild Wolf Leman Russ, who couldn't help but clench the Forgebreaker Warhammer and the blood-red Great Axe, stared at Cypher Leman Russ, whose eyes were tightly closed. He suppressed the rising anger and roared at the surroundings. What exactly are you? Dare to show your true form and face me. Are you worried about your friend? He is fine, he is just quickly recovering from the injuries in his body. At this moment, a dark angel wearing artificer power armor on his tall body, with several thick cables inserted into the back of his head, slowly stepped forward, holding a power staff. My name is Ouroboros. The Astartes shell I use to speak is Saphon, Grand Master of the Dark Angels. Because he has been in contact with and researching us for a long time, some subtle cracks have appeared in his originally pure soul and faith, and he, along with more Inner Circle veterans, is being used by us. The Grand Master Saffon, whose flesh and blood shell was probably all that remained, said numbly to Wild Wolf Lehman Russ. So you are the Hounds of Chaos. No wonder I always felt that there was something wrong with the mental state of the Dark Angels Inner Circle veterans. It turns out you are the culprit. Wild Wolf Lehman Russ blinked his blood-red eyes. He said coldly in a low voice. Ah, this unfamiliar friend, you may have too many misunderstandings about chaos, and don't you also possess the terrifying power bestowed by the gods in your body? We are not the chaos creations of the gods. Corrupting the Dark Angels is only to fulfill the important mission that my Lord entrusted to us in the beginning. The warp artifact Ouroboros controlled the flesh and blood shell of Grand Master Saffon and said lightly to the Wild Wolf Lehman Russ in front. And at this moment, many taciturn Inner Circle veterans quickly dispersed from Cypher Lehman Russ's side. The next second, Cypher Lehman Russ, who suddenly opened his eyes, immediately activated his Artificer power armor and landed heavily on the metal floor. Cypher, be careful of the chaos creation behind you. Wild Wolf Lehman Russ, with a solemn expression, shouted in a deep voice to the newly awakened Cypher. But Cypher Lehman Russ, who shook his head back and forth, turned his head to look at the flesh and blood shell of Grand Master Saffon. Doesn't the wolf cub still know anything? Cypher Lehman Russ suddenly asked. Your friend's vigilance and desire for killing are too strong, and I haven't had time to tell him too much, Ouroboros replied to Cypher Lehman Russ respectfully. And Wild Wolf Lehman Russ, who vaguely sensed an abnormal situation, regripped the two melee weapons in his palms. His blood-red gaze stared fixedly in Cypher Lehman Russ's direction and roared in a low voice. Cypher, is your sanity about to fall again? Let me wake you up. Ouroboros, tell him, who is your master? Hee, avatars of my lord, I have only one master, his true name is, Lehman Russ. Thank you all for your support. Shadow clones continuously emanating from the depths of Roach's enormous body abruptly surged past the countless incoming explosive rounds. Dozens of Dark Angels Inner Circle veterans, caught in the act of pulling their triggers, were completely enveloped within the fleeting shadow clones, temporarily losing their ability to resist. Roach, his face radiating intense murderous intent, swiftly raised his hand and clenched it forcefully. Almost every Inner Circle veteran, unable to move, instantly became a mass of scarlet, putrid sludge, a mixture of metallic fragments and fleshy remains. At this moment, Roach, Azrael, and Ezekiel were advancing deeper into the fortress monastery. Ever since they learned the specific details about the Warp 3 artifacts from the Dark Watchers, they intended to rescue Cypher while also completely destroying those ancient creations, preventing the reactivated warp artifacts from causing further irreparable damage to the Fortress Monastery and even the Dark Angels chapter. After all, Roach's act of annihilating the Inner Circle alone had already severely weakened the entire Dark Angels. However, as the group delved deeper, more Inner Circle veterans, clearly with their minds controlled by chaos forces, continuously obstructed their progress. Even with Roach's rising murderous intent turning countless Inner Circle veterans into scattered corpses, their speed of advancement remained stagnant. Rumble rumble. Just as Roach was contemplating temporarily separating from Azrael and the others, a series of heavy footsteps, approaching from the depths of several passages ahead, echoed once more. The next moment, a large number of Deathwing veterans, clad in Terminator power armor, swiftly revealed their imposing and terrifying figures. They quickly raised the heavy firepower weapons in their hands, desperately suppressing Roach and the others' advance. Simultaneously, accompanied by an even clearer booming roar, a venerable dreadnought, towering around 5 meters tall, also lumbered onto the current battlefield. It's you, Asmodai. At this moment, Azrael, visibly unable to contain his anger, abruptly charged out from behind cover within the passage. After unleashing an earth-shattering roar towards the dreadnought, he charged towards Asmodai, driving his Artificer power armor through a barrage of heavy fire. Azrael, you have come too late after all. The Warp 3 artifacts are about to complete their reunion plan, and this terrifying power, enough to change human history, will make the Dark Angels chapter even more prosperous. We can even completely resolve all the fallen. At this moment, Asmodai, unable to restrain himself, let out an excited roar from within the venerable dreadnought, as if in a state of madness. He immediately activated his entire massive metallic body, brandishing his enormous power fist, and launched a head-on confrontation against the oncoming Azrael. Ezekiel, reacting quickly, had just enveloped Azrael in a layer of psychic shield. He wanted to gather more psychic power, and release a psychic attack with amazing power. However, the Deathwing Terminator veteran swiftly initiated ranged fire suppression, forcing him to temporarily take cover behind obstacles. Something's not right. Asmodai is probably bluffing. The Warp 3 artifacts must not have completed their reunion. The purpose of their attack is a feint, to buy time. Just then, Roach intended to conjure more shadow clones to eliminate the many traitors in one fell swoop. He, who was particularly sensitive to psychic fluctuations, accidentally noticed, through the gaps between the traitorous ranks. A Deathwing veteran was rapidly transferring the warp artifact, the Heart of Blight, into another passage. Ezekiel, Asmodai is up to you and Azrael. I must intercept their transport. Roach's deep voice echoed around him as he pulled the green glowing blood scythe from his storage space. He quickly waved the blood scythe in his hand towards the heavy walls of the fortress monastery. As a large number of metal fragments rapidly fell to the ground, the path behind was completely revealed. Immediately afterward, the enormous Roach activated his adamantium power armor. His entire person, like a humanoid excavator, pierced through layers of thick walls, and charged towards the warp artifact, the Heart of Blight. Rumble rumble. Before long, with a large number of metal fragments suddenly flying into the air, Roach's massive body, enveloped in thick smoke and explosive fire, crashed down in front of the Deathwing Terminator squad escorting the warp artifact. In an instant, countless bolter rounds and melta beams repeatedly bombarded the front of Roach's body, but were completely blocked by a layer of shadow armor that instantly appeared. Thump thump thump. Roach took a deep breath and stomped on the metal floor with his magnetic boots. His massive body, clad in adamantium power armor, crashed into the Terminator squad like a humanoid tank. As the green glowing blood scythe swept back and forth, the Deathwing Terminator squad, unable to react in time, was completely reduced to a field of fleshy remains. And when Roach, covered head to toe in scarlet bloodstains, subconsciously reached out and touched the warp artifact, the Heart of Blight, floating above the ground, he immediately sensed a constant call repeatedly emanating from a distant location. My lord, please come this way, everything is ready, all things are prepared, lacking only the east wind, please bring the Heart of Blight immediately. The next moment, Roach, whose mental willpower and reaction speed were even stronger, instantly broke free from the psychological suggestion imposed on him by the warp artifact. He originally wanted to raise the blood scythe clutched tightly in his hand and destroy the Heart of Blight in front of him. But Roach, frowning slightly, pondered for a moment. He bent down, picked up the warp artifact, activated his adamantium power armor, and sped off in the direction from which the call was coming. Why do my beast instincts and psychic premonitions tell me that if I destroy any of the warp artifacts prematurely, something I will deeply regret will happen? But even so, I must figure out what kind of major changes might occur once the Warp 3 artifacts are reunited. I suspect that the so-called powerful force that can change the course of history probably refers to the ability to travel through time and space with the warp artifacts. But my countless experiences and lessons from trying to change the past have also proven one thing, and that is that my very act of wanting to change history is also a part of history. It may even be my own series of actions that ultimately promote the development and outcome of more things. Thank you all for your support. With the grating hum of the metal floor twisting and deforming, Luo Sha's massive body abruptly burst out of the huge gap, forcibly blasted open by a large amount of dark shadow power, and he landed directly on the ground. Within his field of vision, Wild Wolf Luo Sha and Sai Fu Luo Sha stood side by side, silently looking at each other. Meanwhile, many Inner Circle veterans who had lost their minds, and Holy Master Seifel, who was controlled by the warp divine artifact Ouroboros, slowly knelt on one knee towards Luo Sha. Great Master, you have finally arrived. I am Ouroboros, but you may also call me Ouroboros. Ouroboros's low voice quickly reached Luo Sha's ears. Luo Sha, who was holding the warp divine artifact Plagueheart tightly with one thick arm, gazed coldly at Sai Fu and Wild Wolf. He took a deep breath, and his other large palm involuntarily tightened around the blood scythe, which was surrounded by green light. You two had better give me a reasonable explanation, or I'll kill both of you. At this moment, Luo Sha, with wisps of dark shadow continuously emanating from his entire body, said coldly towards Sai Fu and Wild Wolf. Before he had finished speaking, Sai Fu Luo Sha, with a solemn expression, stepped forward, driving his power armor, and said to Luo Sha. Primarch, please calm down. If we are not mistaken, the owner of the Warp 3 divine artifacts is you at a certain future stage, and the reason they chose to gather here is to send the three of us back to a period in the past when Caliban planet still existed, to completely fill the present we stand in and ensure the future. In other words, we may have no choice but to ensure the normal development of all things. At this moment, Sai Fu Luo Sha's words clearly lessened the killing intent emanating from Primarch Luo Sha by a few points. But he still glanced at the warp divine artifact Ouroboros and the dark angels who were completely controlled by it, and said in a deep voice. I guessed about time travel, but I didn't expect my future self to fall so low as to ally with chaos. What exactly happened to humanity's future? However, no sooner had Luo Sha finished speaking. Holy Master Seifel, controlled by Ouroboros, suddenly raised his head, which was connected by thick cables, and said faintly towards Luo Sha. Great Master, there is one important thing you must understand. You will definitely become Luo Sha in the future, but this does not mean that Luo Sha must be you, just as the Emperor is the God Emperor, but the God Emperor is not necessarily the Emperor. So, who exactly is I? Hearing Ouroboros's words, Luo Sha suddenly asked him in a deep voice. Great Master, please forgive our disrespect, but we cannot reveal more to you. In fact, even the name, Luo Sha, is merely a substitute we are forced to use. We hope you can understand our difficulties. The correct time node is approaching. Please immediately hand over the warp divine artifact Plagueheart you brought. Allow it to temporarily merge with us, and open the time travel passage for you. At this moment, Ouroboros's low voice made the stoic Luo Sha fall into contemplation. He hesitated whether to believe the words of the warp divine artifact, or rather, the chaos creations. If he handed over the Plagueheart, setting aside the truth of the whole matter for a moment, it also meant that he could not escape his predetermined fate no matter what. So was everything he was fighting for now still meaningful? At this moment, as if sensing the emotional fluctuations gradually appearing in Primarch Luo Sha, Ouroboros suddenly spoke again. Great Master, we believe you have already accumulated much experience from countless past time travels. You must have also discovered that many times, some time nodes that are immensely important to the real universe and even the high heavens cannot be altered in the slightest, and this current time travel is a similar important node. Have you ever wondered why you possess the special ability of time travel? We can tell you that the Great Emperor's role in it is less than 30%, the remaining power actually comes from within you. If we must speak more plainly, then have you ever considered what your warp essence is? At this moment, Ouroboros's low words captured Luo Sha's full attention. Frowning slightly, he subconsciously muttered to himself. Is my warp essence related to time travel? Great Master, we cannot give you a more precise answer, but we can tell you that if this time travel fails, you will surely miss the opportunity, and even your time travel ability will be lost for a long time. Ouroboros's words hit Luo Sha's weak spot precisely. If he lost his ability to time travel, even if only temporarily, it would create more uncertainties for Luo Sha's own future, which was undoubtedly something he absolutely did not want to see. And more importantly, Ouroboros, having already revealed so much important information to Luo Sha, should not be a fatal trap planned in advance by a mastermind. With his thoughts turning, Luo Sha took another deep breath. He silently offered prayers and invocations to the Emperor. This time, however, the Emperor gave him no response. In fact, given the Emperor's level of attention to Luo Sha, if the existence of Ouroboros and other chaos creations were a complete lie, then he would have surely acted already. Although I still have doubts about your existence, I intend to believe your words this one time. But if there truly is a problem here, believe me, even if I fall into the depths of the warp, I will transform into a demon and crawl back to find you. Luo Sha, with an indifferent expression, stepped forward, driving his vibranium power armor. The warp divine artifact Plagueheart, held under his thick arm, was also forcefully thrown towards Ouroboros. Holy Master Seifel, controlled by him, immediately rose from between the metal floor panels and carefully caught the Plagueheart. Great Master, our inherent mission is to give everything for you. All is ready. Please prepare yourself and your two avatars. At this moment, Ouroboros's low words gradually twisted and deformed, finally falling completely silent. The Plagueheart, suddenly emitting a large amount of chaos psychic power fluctuations, also rapidly floated towards Ouroboros. Ouroboros, already merged with the Tuchucha engine, undoubtedly held the dominant position in the entire artifact fusion state. At the same time, Luo Sha also stood with Sai Fu and Wild Wolf, driving his vibranium power armor. After the three, facing each other, exchanged glances, they prepared themselves mentally for time travel as usual. In an instant, the entire space was filled with colorful chaos psychic power. And after Ouroboros, having completely merged with the Plagueheart, barely sent out a warning signal towards the three, a massive burst of chaos psychic power completely engulfed everything around them. Thank you all for your support. If Luo Sha's previous simulator-initiated time travel felt like dizziness and nausea, then the time travel initiated by the fusion of the Warp 3 divine artifacts, forcefully fueled by a large amount of chaos psychic power, brought only pain and tearing. In fact, Luo Sha, whose eyes instinctively closed, felt as if his entire massive body had been completely reshaped, and endless pain quickly overwhelmed his entire mind. However, once all the painful sensations completely vanished, Luo Sha, who suddenly opened his eyes, watched as countless lush, dark forests rapidly approached him. Rumble. Even though Luo Sha, reacting incredibly quickly, immediately covered his head inside his skull helmet, and a layer of extremely powerful shadow armor completely covered his entire vibranium power armor. When he landed heavily, his massive body still plowed a deceleration strip several kilometers long through the muddy vegetation of the dark forest, like a skipping stone on water. Ah! I used to complain that the Emperor, that old man, was not a good person because of the landing position, but I didn't expect this boomerang to eventually hit me. At this moment, Luo Sha, with faint golden blood continuously oozing from his mouth and nose, muttered to himself. Not long after, he struggled to get up from the deep mud pit, his massive body gradually recovering from its injuries. His wary gaze swept through the unfamiliar surroundings through the skull helmet's eyepiece. No need to guess, this must be Caliban before it became a mineral deposit, but where did Cypher and the wolves land? I hope nothing serious happened. At this moment, Luo Sha took a deep breath and surveyed the Caliban forest, which seemed to consist only of endless trees. He casually chose a direction and slowly walked forward, driving his vibranium power armor. However, Luo Sha had not walked too far when he suddenly slammed on his magnetic boots. The huge roar he had caused during his descent had clearly attracted a large number of the Caliban forest's native species, the Caliban beast. Thump thump thump. Deep within the dimly lit, dark forest, Caliban beasts, ranging in size from 3 to 10 meters, slowly surrounded Luo Sha. And Luo Sha did not hesitate. With most of his internal injuries already recovered, he pulled out the glowing green blood scythe from his storage page and gripped it tightly in his massive palm. The next moment, Luo Sha immediately drove his vibranium power armor and charged fiercely towards the largest Caliban beast. Hiss hiss hiss. The almost indestructible blood scythe was a natural bane for the Caliban beast, which only possessed flesh and blood. Every time Luo Sha swung the blood scythe, the Caliban beast in front of him, which resembled a giant elk but also had a soft trunk, would let out a deafening roar of pain. Large amounts of viscous blood, emitting faint chaos psychic power, along with large chunks of flesh and dismembered limbs, continuously detached from the Caliban beast's massive body. Perhaps Luo Sha's slaughter of the Caliban beasts was too bloody and brutal. Aside from a few Caliban beasts that still held a strong advantage in size and continued to attack Luo Sha, more Caliban beasts, after smelling the splattered viscous blood, immediately turned and ran deeper into the dark and profound Caliban forest. A few minutes later, the last Caliban beast with a huge lion's head fell heavily among countless muddy fallen leaves, also producing a thunderous crash. However, just as Luo Sha, who had just lowered his blood scythe, was about to continue his journey, a subtle rustling sound from deeper within the Caliban forest once again put him on alert. Howl. The next second, a humanoid creature, only about the size of Luo Sha's calf, suddenly leapt down from the crown of a thick tree. Luo Sha, reacting incredibly quickly, immediately captured the creature's full appearance. This humanoid creature had incredibly messy, broken golden hair. Its small body, covered with fine scars, was haphazardly wrapped in a layer of old, foul-smelling beast hide. At this moment, the humanoid creature, clawing and baring its teeth in a threatening posture, landed heavily on a still warm Caliban beast, and it even let out an incredibly childish beast roar towards Luo Sha, who was gripping the blood scythe. A wild man who can survive tenaciously in the dark forests of Caliban, who else could it be but our most revered Primarch's eldest son, the Lord of the First Legion, Lionel Johnson. Luo Sha, who couldn't help but shake his head, gazed through his helmet's eyepiece at the lion cub in front of him, who was like a beast. He instinctively let out a long sigh. However, Luo Sha's current appearance and state were indeed extremely threatening. He merely took one step forward, and the lion cub, currently possessing only survival instincts, immediately leapt behind the Caliban beast's corpse. And after Luo Sha stopped his steps and waited in place for a while, the cautious lion cub peeked his small head out from behind the Caliban beast's corpse, occasionally letting out threatening growls and roars. "Little guy, you want food, right? All the prey here can be yours." At this moment, Luo Sha, whose thoughts were rapidly turning, first put away the blood scythe in his palm. Then, he deliberately drove his vibranium power armor to kneel on one knee, slightly reducing the intimidating presence that a Primarch's massive size brought to others. And his method indeed had some effect. The incredibly wary lion cub scrambled back onto the top of the Caliban beast's corpse, using both hands and feet. He stared intently at Luo Sha's every move with wide eyes, then bent down and began to gnaw on the fresh flesh at the Caliban beast's wound. Tisk tisk, a Primarch cub eating raw meat and drinking blood, huh? If I were to save this scene as a video projection, would the future Lionel Johnson twist my head off? Luo Sha, his bronze face hidden inside the skull helmet, instinctively revealed a hint of a smile. However, when he tried to casually control his vibranium power armor to record the image, a sudden, strong palpitation, accompanied by tearing pain that spread through every inch of his massive body, instantly surged from within. What's going on? Is this a side effect of forced time travel? At this moment, Luo Sha, whose vision was rapidly shifting, suddenly found that his entire massive body was fluctuating between illusion and reality. On one of his huge, just raised hands, even layers of more mysterious and unknown overlapping shadows were intertwined and revealed. The next second, Luo Sha, who had no time to react, fell heavily forward into the muddy fallen leaves, and his entire consciousness completely entered a state of unconsciousness. Thank you all for your support. Luo Sha abruptly opened his tightly shut eyes. Still not fully conscious, he found the view through his helmet's eye lenses pitch black, so he instinctively raised a hand to touch the front. However, as Luo Sha moved, He also sensed through his perception of the outside world that a large number of ropes, resembling tree roots or vines, were tightly wrapped around his massive body. It was only when Luo Sha used several fingers to wipe his helmet's eye lenses that he realized someone had sealed his skull helmet with mud-like substance. How long have I been unconscious? What power or factor could possibly cause a Primarch to fall into such a state? Luo Sha thought silently as he quickly cleared the large amount of dried mud from the outside of his helmet. Dozens of seconds later, with the entire skull helmet completely receding, Luo Sha successfully revealed his bronze-colored face. He rotated his emotionless gaze back and forth. Only then did he realize he was in a corner of a large, spacious cave. And in the center of the cave, besides a natural gap that was letting in outside light, there were also many traces of life left on the cave floor. Immediately after, Luo Sha also looked down and saw a large number of wild Caliban vines, already rooted and sprouting, growing rampantly between his massive body, and judging by their plant state, this situation had persisted for quite some time. The next moment, Luo Sha, who had been repeatedly scanning, immediately noticed that the metal 10 rings, which he constantly wore on the outer shell of his vibranium arm, had completely vanished. And it wasn't just the metal 10 rings that were missing, even his sidearm, furnace heart, and the vibranium wings, the only parts of his vibranium power armor that could be removed by terrifying brute force, had all disappeared. Is Lion Cub a Caliban bandit? Or is this just the predatory nature embedded in our Primarch's bones? Feeling rather speechless about this, Luo Sha had no choice but to activate the vibranium power armor on his massive body, which seemed to have been still for a long time, and slowly rise from the ground. However, before he could move a few steps forward in his vibranium power armor, which was entwined with wild vines, the sound of heavy footsteps from the cave entrance temporarily caught his attention. Thump, thump, thump. Not long after, a golden-haired giant, standing about 3 meters tall and extremely robust, easily dragged a Caliban beast with a scorpion tail and lion body back into the cave. And as Lion Cub's feet heavily stomped the ground, he almost instantly fixed his eyes, filled with savagery and wildness, firmly on Luo Sha's massive body. Wait, don't move yet. At this moment, the quick-thinking Luo Sha immediately raised his hand and made a simple gesture to the massive lion cub, signaling him to stop. He knew that Lionel Johnson might not understand normal human language at this point, so he gestured back and forth while repeating, "You. Me. Brother. Blood-related brother." As soon as Luo Sha's gestures and words fell, Lion Cub, whose facial expressions seemed much more bewildered than before, repeatedly opened and closed his mouth. Simple, slightly unrefined words immediately burst forth from his mouth. "You. Who? Threat. Not a threat. I am Luo Sha, watch my mouth. Luo Sha, I am your Primarch brother. Your bloodline should be able to sense me." The patient Luo Sha repeatedly spoke the words to the wary lion cub. And perhaps it was the bloodline connection between Primarchs, or perhaps Lion Cub finally understood the meaning of some simple words. Several minutes later, Lion Cub slowly loosened the crude cutting weapon, made by binding vibranium wings to a thick tree trunk, from behind his broad back. The wide-eyed opponent pointed with his strong arm, adorned with metal 10 rings, at the Caliban beast corpse nearby, and shouted towards Luo Sha, "Brother. Tasty. If I didn't actually know what you meant by that, I'd think you were planning to eat me." Luo Sha couldn't help but groan as he slowly shook his head. He subconsciously opened the material storage page. He intended to show the young lion cub nearby a small, astonishing change by extracting a large amount of food supplies. However, at this moment, Luo Sha, now focused, suddenly discovered that his simulator seemed to have undergone some extremely strange and special changes. The simulator pages, which originally resembled open book pages, had completely closed. Now, the simulator, shaped like a huge ancient book, was firmly bound together by mysterious black and white chains emitting an enigmatic aura. What happened to my simulator? I really shouldn't have listened to the advice of those chaos creations. Luo Sha's thoughts spun rapidly, his face gradually darkening. He was currently unable to open any page of the simulator. This not only meant that Luo Sha could not use all of the simulator's functions. It even meant that he might never be able to escape this past timeline. Brother. Tasty. At this moment, Lion Cub, who had already begun to stoop and process the Caliban beast's corpse, once again extended an invitation to eat towards Luo Sha. Taking a deep breath and trying to adjust his mindset, Luo Sha immediately moved forward in his vibranium power armor. He looked down at Lion Cub, who was cutting the beast's corpse with his vibranium wings, and thought silently. I've encountered similar situations before. Once I reunite with my other clones, I'm sure I can find a solution. For now, I should try to teach the still naive Lionel Johnson some necessary. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. Just then, in the depths of the wide cave not far from Luo Sha and Lion Cub, wisps of mysterious mist, interwoven in black and white, appeared out of thin air, silently occupying more than half of the cave's space. And Lion Cub, whose perception of dangerous situations was extremely strong, along with Luo Sha, whose beast instincts had begun to buzz, almost simultaneously turned their heads, entering a state of readiness towards the depths of the black and white mist, as if they were about to launch a fierce attack the next second. Immediately after, with a series of crackling sounds of spatial structure tearing, a massive, headless body, clad in a set of damaged vibranium power armor, yet completely lacking a head at the neck, suddenly appeared within the sight range of Luo Sha and Lion Cub. Luo Sha, with a slight frown, merely gazed at this terrifying headless body, which seemed to consist only of black and white colors on its surface. His unintentionally activated psychic precognition allowed him to instantly glimpse some secrets from the other party that only he could know. If Luo Sha hadn't been mistaken, this headless body was probably a corpse accidentally left behind during one of his simulations. But its true name was Time Remnants. Thank you all for your support. Writer's block is killing me. Thanks to Fanhua Zishang for the 1000-point reward. In fact, the bestial instincts buzzing within Lorger didn't detect any psychic fluctuations belonging to the High Lords of Terra from the sudden temporal remnants. This seemed to be a mysterious power completely independent of the warp, yet similar to it. Moreover, Lorger suspected these things were greatly connected to him. The psychic precognition ability, which had consistently played a significant role, also revealed to Lorger the true purpose of his and his clones' arrival. That was to eliminate these temporal remnants, which shouldn't have existed in the first place, as much as possible, to truly ensure the lion's normal growth on this timeline. Otherwise, not only would the underage lion encounter immense dangers that even a Primarch couldn't easily handle, but the future fate of the entire Caliban would also undergo even greater changes. The most severe scenario might lead to the lion and the First Legion ceasing to exist from the very beginning. Thump, thump, thump. At this moment, the young lion, clearly sensing the immense threat, roared deafeningly towards the temporal remnant. Before the quick-witted Lorger could stop him, the young lion, with his incredibly agile and robust physique, charged towards the slow-moving temporal remnant, wielding a crude melee weapon made from vibranium wings for an overhead chop. Lorger, with wisps of dark shadows constantly emanating from his body, also gripped a shadow weapon he had just conjured. He rapidly propelled his vibranium-powered armor towards the headless, out-of-control remnant in a combat charge. Boom! In mere seconds, the crude melee weapon made from vibranium wings in the young lion's palm instantly shattered, forming splinters and vibranium debris that scattered everywhere. The young lion's massive body, still mid-air, was sent flying backward at an even more alarming speed than before. Simultaneously, Lorger, who had almost brushed past him, immediately saw that a large chunk of flesh seemed to have been erased from the young lion's bare chest, precisely where the temporal remnant's suddenly swung fist had landed. Even a Primarch's resilient physique can't withstand the destructive power of the temporal remnant. No wonder all three of us needed to come back. Can't engage it head-on, or even I might not survive. The quick-thinking Lorger immediately assessed the combat situation. He abruptly shifted his magnetic boots, beginning to circle around the slow-moving temporal remnant. However, when the shadow scythe, formed from a large amount of dark shadows, sliced through the air, carrying countless black and white mists, and heavily struck the temporal remnant. Lorgar, his expression grave, was shocked to discover that the temporal remnant was completely immune to psychic attacks. "Brother, my blood scythe. Find the scythe weapon emitting green light." Lorgar shouted loudly towards the young lion without turning his head. He didn't even care if the other party understood the meaning of these complex words. His entire massive body wielded 2 vibranium iron fists, launching an extremely risky melee attack against the temporal remnant. Boom! Lorgar's extremely powerful physical strength caused the already slow-moving temporal remnant to stagger backward repeatedly. However, the occasional deadly counterattacks it could launch forced Lorgar, whose nerves were constantly on edge, to dodge around, preventing the destructive power of the temporal remnant from causing him great harm. Roar! Just then, with a roar that once again echoed throughout the cave, the young lion, having successfully found the blood scythe, immediately launched a new round of frenzied attacks towards the temporal remnant. The young lion, whose ferocious wound on his chest was rapidly healing, already knew the difference between this temporal remnant and the Caliban beasts. He began to wildly swing the green light-encircled blood scythe, using the powerful physical strength inherent to a Primarch. Although the temporal remnant, completely immune to psychic attacks, possessed considerable resistance to physical attacks as well. It couldn't help but suffer extremely astonishing damage in the face of the blood scythe's sharp blade. Boom! When Lorgar once again exerted himself, propelling his vibranium-powered armor forward, and completely knocked the temporal remnant to the ground with his 2 vibranium iron fists. The quick-witted young lion immediately leapt into the air, wielding the blood scythe, forcefully splitting the temporal remnant completely in 2 from the middle. Crackle! At this moment, numerous visible, transparent fissures suddenly appeared in the spatial structure around Lorgar and the young lion. Lorgar quickly reached out and pulled back the young lion, who was planning to continue attacking. The 2 of them leapt quickly towards the other side of the wide cave in unison. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Soon after, when the black and white mist that permeated the cave and the constantly shattering temporal remnant had completely disappeared, Lorgar, taking a deep breath, turned his head towards the young lion, whose expression was still ferocious, and exclaimed, "Brother, you are both intelligent and powerful." "Brother, I am both powerful and intelligent." At this moment, the young lion, like a parrot, hammered his bare chest, where the injuries were gradually recovering. He raised his hand and casually handed the blood scythe, tightly gripped in his palm, to Lorgar. He even intended to return the metal 10 rings that were worn on his thick arms. "No need to return the metal 10 rings, consider it a small gift from me to you, my Primarch brother. Later, I'll teach you how to communicate with the metal 10 rings through your consciousness," Lorgar said, shaking his head, a smile unconsciously appearing at the corner of his mouth. Crack, crack, crack. However, at this moment, the faint smile that had not yet completely dissipated on Lorgar's bronze face seemed to freeze completely. He looked down, somewhat desperately, at his hairstyle, his entire massive body once again falling into a state of overlapping afterimages. The ultimate tearing pain rapidly filled Lorgar's mind and flesh, making him look like a blurry figure with poor signal reception. In just a few seconds, Lorgar, forcefully resisting the pain with his tenacious will, immediately moved away from the young lion, who was planning to come forward to help. He drove his hazy vibranium-powered armor to kneel on one knee with immense pain. Before he completely lost consciousness, he roared in a deep voice towards the lion, who was frowning with a dazed expression. "Lionel Johnson. Remember, your name is Lionel Johnson. You must contact the surviving humans on Caliban, learn from them, love them, integrate with them, and then guide them. This is your inherent duty as a gene sire." The next second, just as Lorgar's words echoed in the young lion's ears, his entire massive body, however, completely disappeared from the young lion's field of vision, as if a television signal had been suddenly cut off. "Thank you all for your support." With a subtle sound of space gradually shattering, Luo Sha's massive body, still in a kneeling posture, appeared out of thin air on the ground covered with fallen leaves and dirt. The cold, reflective vibranium power armor shell also crushed many densely growing weeds and shrubs. At this moment, the tearing pain that once filled his entire mind and flesh had completely disappeared. If Luo Sha wasn't still heavily panting, his breathing rhythm constantly giving a clear reminder, then even Luo Sha himself would doubt if everything he had experienced before was an illusion. The first onset caused me to unexpectedly fall into a coma. Judging by the massive size of the lion cub, the coma probably lasted for several years. The second onset felt more like experiencing an extremely unstable time travel. Was it a side effect caused by not using the simulator for time travel? Or was it an additional influence brought by the so-called time remnants? And what exactly are time remnants? A special spatiotemporal phenomenon caused by me, or an unknown enemy specifically looking for trouble with me. Unfortunately, my psychic power precognition couldn't provide me with more information. Of course, I really hope it's not a failed product concocted by the Emperor and a future version of me deep in the warp, otherwise, why would the three of us need to protect Lionel Johnson's timeline? At this moment, Luo Sha took a deep breath, quickly casting aside the numerous thoughts swirling in his mind. He looked up and repeatedly surveyed his surroundings. He found himself still deep within the lush, serene, and quiet Caliban forest. However, Luo Sha also believed that given the unstable time travel from before, his current location must have changed in both space and time. Thinking of this, Luo Sha instinctively narrowed his eyes and immediately checked his overall condition. Since the simulator had been completely sealed by the mysterious black and white chains, naturally, no more stored supplies could be extracted. Although the vibranium power armor he wore on his massive body was slightly damaged, with the loss of the vibranium wings, at least the propulsion system was completely out of commission. However, the overall structure of the power armor and many servo mechanisms were intact, enough to support Luo Sha through more intense battles. As for weapons, the blood scythe, which had accompanied Luo Sha the longest, had no issues, its sharp edge still emitting a brilliant green light. It was just that the furnace heart, the pistol Luo Sha usually carried, was probably in Lionel Johnson's hands, and he could try to get it back later if there was a chance. Afterward, he checked the storage space behind the vibranium power armor and found the reality stone and dozens of panaceas perfectly intact, lying quietly within. Thump, thump, thump. Not long after, Luo Sha, slowly activating his vibranium power armor, used his survival experience to briefly determine his direction. He then moved quickly towards other parts of the Caliban forest. He planned to see if he could make contact with the local humans on Caliban, and then take the opportunity to find the unseen wolf cub and Cypher, or even Lionel Johnson himself. However, as Luo Sha, with rapid strides, moved swiftly through the quiet and deep Caliban forest, he unexpectedly noticed that wisps of strange, black and white intertwined mist were once again permeating the humid air around him. Before the vigilant Luo Sha could prepare for the upcoming battle, with a sudden heavy thud, a familiar figure, carrying a breaker warhammer in one hand and wearing a set of vibranium specialized power armor on his tall body, entered Luo Sha's field of vision, looking somewhat disheveled. Wolf cub. At this moment, the quicker reacting Luo Sha immediately raised his hand to greet the other party. Primarch, I finally found you. After the strange black and white mist in the air quickly dissipated, the wolf cub, whose cyan wolf eyes shifted, rapidly activated his power armor and sped towards Luo Sha's direction. Wolf cub, have you seen Cypher? Wait, what happened to your severed arm? Luo Sha, stepping forward in his power armor, asked the wolf cub who had arrived before him. His cold gaze fixed on the other's seemingly elbow-severed thick left arm, and he couldn't help but frown. That's exactly what I was going to tell you, Primarch. Have you seen those humanoid monsters that came with the strange mist? They seem to be our bodies left in the past. This is the first souvenir they left me. I've already tried. Panacea is completely ineffective for this kind of injury, neither bone nor flesh can grow back. I'm afraid I'll need to replace it with a vibranium arm in the future. As for Cypher, I haven't seen him yet. The wolf cub, instinctively baring his teeth, casually explained his encounter to the slightly frowning Luo Sha. The slightly more unfortunate aspect for him compared to Luo Sha was that 3 dismembered humanoid monsters, the so-called Time Remnants, had attacked the wolf cub. And the wolf cub, encountering these unknown entities for the first time, only managed to completely eliminate all the Time Remnants after sacrificing half an arm as a price. So Luo Sha shared some of the information he knew through his psychic power precognition with the wolf cub. Time Remnants. There's such a thing. I thought the Chaos Gods had found us some new fun, no wonder my nose couldn't smell the Chaos psychic power stench on those things. It's likely that the existence of these things has little to do with the high heavens. The wolf cub, with a solemn expression, said to Luo Sha, but why our Time Remnants chose to appear on Caliban, and what their purpose is, that's what we need to focus on. I do hope to see Cypher soon, perhaps his way of thinking can provide us with some important information. At this moment, Luo Sha, suddenly remembering something, asked the wolf cub, by the way, how did you get here just now? Were you directly transported by some unstable time travel, or did you just finish a battle and then saw me in the strange black and white mist? The wolf cub, hearing Luo Sha's question, replied without hesitation, perhaps it's because I encountered a greater number of Time Remnants. After the intense battle ended, the pervasive strange mist didn't dissipate, and as I went deeper into the mist looking for a way out, I seemed to vaguely experience a dizzying sensation similar to teleportation. The next second, I saw you. So it seems that only I, a genuine Primarch, am qualified to enjoy that endless pain of soul and flesh gradually tearing apart. This is truly. Never mind, let's leave here first. At this moment, Luo Sha shook his head slightly and couldn't help but let out a sigh. After a moment of deep thought, he immediately activated his power armor with the one-armed wolf cub and sped deeper into the Caliban forest. Thank you for your support. Chapter 925, Caliban's Past, Time Remnants Part 5. As dusk gradually fell, the silence and depth of Caliban forest were completely shattered by the roars and howls of countless Caliban beasts. Luo Sha and Wolf Cub, who had already casually killed an unknown number of Caliban beasts along the way, had no choice but to temporarily halt their advance. They planned to rest and eat where they were. As for food sources, Caliban Forest not only contained Caliban beasts slightly corrupted by chaos, but also many plants and animals that were incredibly lethal to mortals. Of course, the lethal plants and animals in Caliban Forest were a minor issue compared to all the creatures in the notoriously dangerous Catachan Forest. Crackling. Under the flickering firelight, searing tongues of fire constantly licked at an unnamed beast that Wolf Cub had just hunted. Drops of scalding, boiling, delicious fat continuously dripped from the long, narrow handle of the breaker Warhammer, falling into the bonfire where large amounts of Mars sometimes rose. If Fulgrim knew you were using the Warhammer he personally forged to roast meat, you might be forced to taste the true flavor of Phoenix Force. Luo Sha, slowly chewing a large piece of roasted meat, leisurely said to Wolf Cub, who was also devouring his food at a storm-like pace. HMPH, if you've got the guts, don't eat it. Whose fault is it that your storage method had issues and you didn't prepare a backup? It seems after you became a Primarch, my lord, adored by the stars, you've lost a lot of the worries of surviving alone. Hearing Wolf Cub's taunt, Luo Sha raised a hand to wipe the grease from the corner of his mouth. He said calmly, Wolf Cub, do you think I can be as carefree as you? Roaming around with a group of wolf cubs. Those in power also have their worries. The strategic direction of the entire Calamity Legion needs to be personally overseen by me. The countless psychic supports of the Imperium Nihilus need my personal review. The prayer support on the simulator cannot be neglected, because since the Emperor assigned me the task, it means that the landing point at that time has completely lost its means of response. Killing chaos, killing greater demons, killing green skins, killing undead, killing pointy ears, and occasionally exchanging blows with traitor Primarch brothers. I've only lived for less than a few decades, yet I feel like I've been fighting wars my whole life, and in the future, no matter how long I live, countless large and small wars await me. Do you think I haven't considered abandoning it all? But unless I can find a hidden space where no crisis will ever appear, otherwise, whether it's here or the homeworld, all sorts of chaotic things will happen, thereby threatening my very existence. At this moment, Luo Sha's low voice made Wolf Cub, who was diligently tearing at the roasted meat, temporarily stop eating. However, just as the other party was about to try and say something to ease the awkward atmosphere, Luo Sha, whose nostrils flared, suddenly raised his hand with a grave expression, stopping Wolf Cub's words. Something's wrong. I seem to smell a large amount of human blood, and it's fresh blood that's only just flowed out. As soon as Luo Sha's words fell, Wolf Cub, instinctively twitching his nose, immediately dropped the roasted meat in his single palm. He gripped the breaker warhammer, still hot from the bonfire, and turned to look at Luo Sha, asking, "If I'm not mistaken, the exact location is about a dozen kilometers from our center point. Should we go check it out?" "Yes. We finally encountered a human settlement on the Caliban world. We need to know more information." At this moment, Luo Sha and Wolf Cub, both with solemn expressions, almost simultaneously activated their vibranium power armor and rose to their feet. With their melee weapons tightly gripped in their palms, they briefly identified the direction. The two quickly melted into the deepening night, rushing towards the location from which the strong scent of blood continuously wafted. Boom boom boom. Soon after, as Luo Sha and Wolf Cub drew closer to their target location, they faintly heard the low rumbling sounds of numerous melee weapons being swung back and forth and the firing of physical firearms. The next moment, when Luo Sha, leading the charge with the blood scythe in his palm, burst out of Caliban Forest first, he immediately saw large amounts of strange black and white mist wantonly spreading among the low-lying buildings. And numerous mortal knights launching a fierce assault on a dozen time remnants. Wolf Cub, attack with me. Attract the time remnants' attention. At this moment, the quick-reacting Luo Sha immediately led Wolf Cub in an awe-inspiring combat charge. The blood scythe, fiercely swung by him into swirling green light wheels, carried an extremely piercing hum as it heavily cleaved a time remnant, missing both arms and with a blurred face, completely in half. And Wolf Cub, grinning menacingly as he wielded the breaker warhammer, like a human tank, completely drew the attention of even more time remnants. At the same time, many mortal knights nearby, who had suffered heavy casualties trying to break through the time remnants' physical defenses with melee weapons, were first stunned. Then, a squad commander, after vaguely seeing the faces of Luo Sha and the others, immediately shouted in panic. "This isn't just an ordinary Caliban mist incursion, it's another, Luo Sha, rampage. All combat knights of the Order of Knights, let us fight with all our might to protect our homeworld. Even if we unfortunately die in battle, Lionel Johnson, my lord, and Luther, my lord, will avenge us." However, just as this squad commander was about to lead all the knights to bravely and selflessly stop the time remnant, Luo Sha, from rampaging, Luo Sha and Wolf Cub, almost at full combat strength, had already cooperated to completely eliminate a dozen time remnants within their field of vision. Immediately afterward, Luo Sha, furiously driving his vibranium power armor in a terrifying charge, almost immediately gripped the squad commander, who was also wearing a set of dark green ancient power armor, tightly in his huge palm. "I ask, you answer. What do you mean, another Luo Sha rampage? Did you already know who I am?" Luo Sha, with an icy expression, stared intently at the mortal knight whose face was turning red, and asked in a deep voice. Lionel Johnson, my lord, said that the so-called mist incursions were residual powers accidentally left behind by one of his Primarch brothers, and that blood brother was named Luo Sha. Within our Order of Knights, after calling it for so long, we started referring to those mist incursions where the monster's face is clearly visible and the destructiveness is greater as Luo Sha rampages. At this moment, with each sentence spoken by the mortal knight whose face rapidly reddened, Luo Sha's indifferent expression deepened with a frown. Until Luo Sha took a deep breath, completely released the other party, and then asked in a deep voice. "Lionel Johnson, where is he now?" Thank you for your support. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.